To order. Please let the record show that all but Scott Christ are present today at the board table. At this time, we will begin our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time we'll move to item 2.03, approval of agenda. The recommended action is that the board approve the agenda as presented. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you. Motion from member McCoskey. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from member Bruner. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote.
Yes, my mouse is gone, so I gotta readjust.
Oh,
Is it not? Okay. Is yours not popping up? Miriam's and I. Mine has not popped up. I'm also not. 6-0, the motion passes. This time we'll move to item 3.01, public comments. The Board of Education welcomes comments about the issues being discussed. The board uses this time in our meeting to listen to the public, but will not comment or engage with the public during this meeting. The board allows for up to 10 speakers per public comment period. The board chair will call on the individuals in the order in which they signed up. Substitutions are not permitted. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes and will be timed by the board secretary. Comments must be acceptable for a business and family-friendly environment. Inappropriate language, gestures, or personal attacks will not be tolerated. It's inappropriate to address the board about individual students or individual staff members by name in open meetings. If you have any concerns about individuals, these concerns should be addressed through the appropriate administrative supervisors, either in the schools or the district office. If you have materials that you'd like to share, please place them on the tray on the podium, and they'll be distributed to the board members following the meeting. Our first speaker this evening is Dr. John Vaughn.
Thank you. I'm Dr. John Vaughn, past president of the American Society for Church Growth, and I'm here tonight as a member and representative of the concerned pastors of the greater Springfield area. I have my academic background in sociology, history, and theology. I've been quoted by most major media in the U.S. and in many parts of the world, including Tokyo, Britain, Times of London, Sun of Tokyo, just name the publication, 20 minutes, 60 minutes, you name it, been there, done that. As a member of the group, Concerned Pastors of the Greater Springfield Area, we are here to oppose any endorsement by this group of any suggestions from the LGBTQ community to endorse Gay Pride Month. This is inconsistent with the mission of this school board and of this school district. This past week, President Biden announced that the bravest people he's ever met were the LGBTQ community. He seems to have forgotten as commander-in-chief that just a few days before, we celebrated D-Day. D-Day keeps you and me from speaking German today. It was the largest naval invasion in the history of the world. Those men who were on those landing crafts, many of them were walking in vomit when they got on the landing craft, not off of it. 9 in 10 were predicted not even to live once their feet hit the sands of that beach. So I think that the fact that we celebrate one day a year for them, which gave us our freedom today where you're not speaking German, and I'm not speaking German, given one day, and then to be asked for this group to ask us to give a month of recognition seems a little out of order. But so much for that. We do not consider the month as it is being celebrated. We do for D-Day, but for Pride Month, we consider this not to be a family-friendly event, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. If you notice the media releases, photos were characteristic of the history of gay parades throughout history. We'll deal with that in just a minute. But the focus was always on males presenting themselves as females. Don't believe it, just go back and look at all the news leader releases and what they were focusing on. To bring in a male drag character by the name, for example, local grown, of crystal meth, a drug named after a drug that has killed thousands of Missourians. It seems a little out of character to be family friendly. And then also to have a name like,
Thank you, John. Your time's elapsed.
okay, you get the message.
Our next speaker
We're
is
opposed.
Joan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Our next speaker is Joan Gentry.
Change my glasses here. In order to read this. Good evening. My name is Joan Gentry, and I'm speaking to you as a member of the League of Women Voters of Southwest Missouri. The League is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. We empower voters and defend democracy through education and advocacy. We are fully committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of our core principles is that every person should have access to free public education that provides equal opportunity to all. It is the Springfield's public schools' focus on the success of all students that brings me to the podium tonight. Our league is in support of a resolution from this board reaffirming a commitment to a safe learning and working environment, an environment that's free from discrimination and harassment, and where all individuals are treated with dignity and respect. And that resolution contain a specific statement of support directed to our trans and LGBTQ students. We know that our students are our future. They will become the voting members of our community and the leaders who will be making decisions about that community and our school system. We know that a high-quality public education for all children is necessary to sustain our democratic way of life. And we know that students who feel safe, supported, and respected at school have better academic outcomes. I wish that we felt that our students in the trans and LGBTQ community actually felt that they were a part of all students in our schools. I doubt that they do, considering the incidents of harassment that are occurring now in our schools and communities. However, a public policy statement from this board affirming that the focus of Springfield Public Schools is on all students, including our trans and LGBTQ students, might just be a beginning. Our students need that specific recognition, a word or words that includes who they are so that they really see that they're a part of this group. You and I may understand that the phrase students in Springfield schools are treated with dignity and respect, and that that's meant to include everyone. But when a student is being harassed by other students, the media, some religious groups, or politicians, that student needs to hear the affirmation out loud and see it in writing for all to see. These students are not asking for special treatment. They are simply asking to be treated with dignity and respect. Our league hopes this board will support a resolution affirming support of our trans and LGBTQ students. And thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Our next speaker is Roy Holland.
Madam President, members of the board, my name is Roy Holland. I'm a retired MD, former state representative, and very concerned about our survival as a nation in the United States. A lot of things that happened at home are brought to school. You know that. And our societal problems are getting worse as we go forward and as families struggle to survive a series of destructive events over the last 50 years. Beginning in 1960, we adopted no-fault divorce. Now 50% of the families divorce, and most kids suffer. In the 70s, we adopted abortion, and since then, 60 million babies have been sacrificed. No other nation has ever committed such deadly behavior. This greatly demeans the value of children and hardens hearts. Courts then gave us gay marriage, which further degrades marriage and now divides churches. Finally, cohabitation has become a standard family choice so that children often have uncommitted parents who are unmarried. Here in southwest Missouri now, we have about 40% of the babies in our hospitals. They're born of unmarried parents, and up to about 60% of unmarried parents in urban areas. We have to ask who will raise and teach these children. Will our states and cities do that when the parents are absent? Kids we know need committed and loving parental models. They're very vulnerable, and this will only grow worse. So it's up to the school boards and others to be more aware and to be less casual about what's going on around us. Lately, schools have been additionally burdened with topics such as CRT, diversity, sexual concerns, which ignites a lot of parental response. And state legislatures and nations are doing this. Sweden is one that bought in early to the sexual trials, and recently they've had some official regrets and may reverse their position. And another one is California, which is going the opposite direction, and recently had a bill which requires parents to register student sex ID or pronouns or risk the loss of the parental custody. Missouri and other states seek to stabilize society and protect our families. Where did the push come from? Gallup poll shows that there's been only 3.2% growth in homosexual ID over the last 10 years. Bisexuals are 4%. Transgenders, which are a medical fraud, are only 0.8%. But business and even the medical community is caving to the pressure. So in these times of chaos, we have to be careful about resolutions, and the one that the council passed last week must not be repeated in our school districts around the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Our next speaker is Calvin Morrow.
Good evening. My name is Calvin Morrow, and I also represent concerned pastors of the greater Springfield area. We find it necessary to respond to a request regarding the resolution to affirm Springfield's LGBTQ community. Because the request asks you to make decisions regarding issues of moral significance, we pastors and spiritual leaders have an obligation to respond. This resolution forces those who do not agree into a position of either support or that of an adversary. It can only serve as a political tool to divide the people, which this board is not tasked with. If this body formally affirms members of the LGBTQ community, then those outside of it are unaffirmed. This resolution is fundamentally unfair because all of the citizens are not considered. This resolution would alienate and marginalize all those who may disagree with the lifestyle of the LGBT community, which may be the majority of those you serve. This resolution challenges the liberty to disagree because of the sheer power of your endorsement. At best, it would only stir up emotions. To affirm that the LGBT community are welcome and safe assumes that they are not. Springfield is a welcoming city where people from all backgrounds and orientations enjoy the same opportunities. To assume otherwise would be a mischaracterization and condemnation of the wonderful people of Springfield. A public affirmation would constitute this body of administrators granting extra favor to one group of citizens over another, which is discrimination. In 2016, Springfield dealt with the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Ordinance, also known as SOGI, which left the city in emotional tatters. Back then, the ordinance was proposing extra rights and recognition for the LGBTQ community. One can only assume that if one group of citizens has more rights, then the rest have less rights with no recognition. This resolution proposed today appears to be the same nature with the same potential. Ultimately, there were no winners in 2016. Everyone lost. For the first time, neighbors who were cordial with one another didn't speak. At the end of the day, we ask that this board avoid being part of something that would pit the citizens against each other. As members of the church community, we can assure you that all church leaders who clearly understand the scriptures treat all people with dignity while confronting the fallibility of all men. Disagreement and lifestyle choices should not be interpreted as hatred or homophobia, but rather concern for our fellow man. We believe that the truth of God's word should be made available to all without exception because we are all fall short of God's glory. I ask this body to avoid being part of something that separates Americans from other Americans.
Thank you, Calvin. Our next speaker is Stephanie Spurl.
Hi. So I am here to talk about how, since I guess August or September, people have been speaking out in resolution for the inclusion of the LGBT students in the statement. Little did they know that's actually been going on. So on the website, we found that there was an active link to Pride Fest, and it was made aware. I made them aware of all of you of the schedule, quick breakdown, that the link was active, and showed where you could find out on SPS's page. I received, quote, Ms. Sproul, we confirm that the link and photos in question were posted on the website in 2021 and had not been edited since that time. SPS is not aware of the specific details of the 2023 event you noted, as the district is not scheduled to participate. We took action to clarify any misunderstanding and remove the outdated information, including the link posted in 2021. Now, they may have a continual link that goes on from year to year, but this is actually a lie. Because and I will give these to you, but I have 2 articles here proving that there were no Pride Fest organization events in 2020 and 2021. So whoever is in charge of SPS communications is openly lying to their taxpayers and their constituents, and I have proof of that. I attended on Saturday, and this is the sad face of a sweet baby boy who does not look like he is supporting love and inclusion, and this does not bring anything that we need to be actively supporting as SPS. I have the picture that said that there was an active link, and I clicked it, and it was current to the 2023 post. On top of that, we have several other pictures, including more dog mask men, that SPS continues to be involved with. Y'all are here for education. Our teachers need you, our principals need you, our students need you more than ever. Your job is to help support academic achievement. And the biggest thing is we've seen a decline for 10 years, and we've gained nothing. We've gained absolutely nothing. I looked at the website before I came, and it said SPS is committed to the well-being of each student by providing high-quality academic opportunities. We need to provide academic opportunities, stay completely apolitical, and just focus on helping our schools. We need education, we need discipline, and we need to support and retention of the teachers, staff, and principals, because we're losing them and paras exponentially. We're in trouble, and I just pray that come August, this will not be the same problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Our next speaker is Carrie Wells.
Good evening. I just want to bring to attention to the school board that our community is divided regarding children, and this division continues to grow. There are clearly 2 opposing thoughts in our community, and each side believes they are 100% right. The difference between the 2 sides is clear after we've seen statements made by Governor Parson and rebuttals by some activists and Democrats. One was the gender-affirming care ban that Governor Parson signed into law this week. He said that it is meant to protect children from making life-altering decisions that they could come to regret in adulthood once they had physically and emotionally matured. The second bill that he signed into law was restricting athletes' participation in sports to teams that is based on their biological sex. Responses from our community included, they are trying to take our rights, our freedom, and our pride away from us. Homophobic bullying is poison and is meant to stoke fear and division. Crystal Quaid was quoted as saying, "The governor is persecuting innocent families who are just trying to live their lives in peace." I come to the board this day because you have the great responsibility to govern, set rules, policies, and approve procedures that affect the education and safety of thousands of Springfield youth. The end result for our community is peace. To bring peace, governing bodies must courageously adhere to the moral code. The moral code is simply a consistent set of rules that are widely accepted by the community. Example of age restrictions are part of the moral code. You cannot consent to a sexual relationship till you are a certain age. Smoking, enlisting in the military, drinking, marrying, vote, driving, the list goes on. Again, the moral code must be consistent as applied, and the moral code must be widely accepted. Pedophilia is not affirmed in our moral code. When pedophiles rename themselves to minor accepted persons, they should not be affirmed. They are outside the moral code. They are the plus in the LGBTQ plus.
Thank you, Carrie. Our next speaker is Robert Ingold.
Good evening, Madam President and honorable members of the Springfield Board of Education. My name is Robert Ingold, and I have resided in Springfield School District for 20 years. I commend you for making time available at your meetings to hear concerns of constituents, and I might say that I've appreciated the comments made thus far. Permit me briefly to introduce myself. I'm first and foremost identify myself as an imperfect follower of Jesus Christ. I treasure God's Word, the Holy Bible, my personal conviction that it is God's will for every person to experience the abundant, everlasting life found in knowing Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. I've been married to my wife, Patty, for 52 years. We've been blessed with 2 children and 9 grandchildren. I've been a licensed attorney in the state of Missouri for 44 years, served in the United States Marine Corps Reserve for 22 years, served as vice president at Southwest Baptist University for 21 years, and served as the lay leader of a congregation of over 4,000 members here in Springfield for a period of 12 years. In 2015, my wife Patty ran for a seat on the Springfield School Board, receiving over 13,000 votes. Patty and I share similar convictions regarding general school board policy, and I believe it's fair to say that the views I expressed to you this evening are representative of a substantial number of constituents of the district. Here are guiding principles I hope you will adhere to when establishing policies for the district. First of all, focus on basic skills of reading, writing, oral communication, technology, science, and mathematics. Ensure students are taught critical thinking skills. Ensure students are not indoctrinated with any particular political or philosophical ideology. Study history objectively and not through the lens of a revisionist theory. Students should learn the good, bad, and ugly of our past, but celebrate the successes of our nation and world. Treat all students with dignity and respect. All students should receive an environment of love and acceptance where learning can flourish. Wherever possible, work harmoniously with parents to reinforce parental values. Respect the faith traditions of each student and promote freedom of speech even when those views are not popular. Promote healthy patriotism. Recite the Pledge of Allegiance with gratitude for the values of democracy and honor our flag. Do not put a stamp of approval on any behavior or lifestyle that a substantial number of constituents find offensive and wrong. ensure students are not exposed to pornographic or inappropriate literature in the curriculum or school libraries.
Thank you, Robert. Your time has elapsed.
Thank you, and God bless you.
Our final speaker this evening is Mary Byrne.
Good evening. I'd like to address efforts to petition the board, which include submission of a draft resolution for statement of support for queer students and staff, expressing dedication to enforcing established policies. I'm going to repeat, they are already established policies which prohibit discrimination, harassment, and bullying on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And a statement published May 17 in the Springfield News Leader from a member of this board suggesting that a specific statement addressing support of trans students is warranted. The statement was reinforced at the board at the last meeting. While I understand the concerns of parents and students who submitted the draft resolution, there's no denying that Americans committed to a biblical worldview are also targets of discrimination and hatred, as demonstrated in the recent Tennessee shooting of teachers and students at a Nashville Christian school. To be clear, I am not here to judge people's behaviors. I'm here to equip the board with information not readily available in the mainstream media, which has direct implications on the board's responsibility to residents in the SPS school district to obey the laws of the country and the state, to honor the freedom of conscience of all residents of the district, and to commit to the academic success of all SPS students. My concerns are several. First, the news leader did not report that any SPS student was actually a victim of discrimination based on sexual orientation, but reported a conflation of a situation involving the use of alleged racist terminology with support for a draft resolution addressing transphobia and homophobia. The connection, as cited in the article, is not a material connection, but it can be made through the matrix of oppression, which is material evidence in an ongoing lawsuit this board is engaged in the case Henderson versus Springfield Public Schools. The Southeastern Legal Foundation asked the court to halt the Springfield Public Schools from violating the First Amendment rights of its employees, explaining, Springfield Public Schools violates First Amendment when it singles out equity as a priority, silences opposing views about the dangers of equity, and forces staff to affirm beliefs they do not support. Even worse, SPS expects its staff to disclose the steps they plan to take to become anti-racist in conformance with the training lessons implemented in those steps. Similarly, this resolution asks the board to take all necessary actions necessary to make our school district a place where people feel safe and valued. Such language suggests the board's actions may include requiring prospective employees to commit to a DEI statement that violates their freedom of conscience, evaluate personnel based on their personal values as expressed in social emotional learning profile data, or terminate personnel whose religious beliefs exclusively support duality in sexual relationships or not hire them at all, despite their qualifications to perform the employment responsibilities.
Thank you.
I've given you sufficient evidence that,
Thank you, Mary.
this is a
Can you please leave
religious
the items
violation
up
of
there?
First Amendment
Your
rights.
time has elapsed. Thank you.
It is there.
Going to move on to information item 4.01, contracts, agreements, change orders, and bids. Of course, this meeting is our study session. Many of these items will be voted on during our next meeting. Contracts, agreements, change orders, and bids. Dr. Mulford.
We received a couple, good evening, board, forgot to greet you. We received a couple of questions since the board packet went live, but we got those answered, but if you have any others, be happy to answer those at this time.
And yes, we've had an opportunity to review these, and I know that there were some questions that board members asked. Are there any additional questions or comments from board members?
I would add, as we close out a fiscal year, it's likely that we'll have a few additions before the next meeting, and we'll notify you as those additions are made.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mulford. We will move on to item 5.01, policy adoptions and revisions. Again, this is just an information item. Dr. Holt is joining us.
No.
Oh, I'm skipped ahead there. Sorry. The look of terror in your face. These policies will be brought forward for vote at the June 27th regular meeting. Again, we've had these policies since Friday, and I know that there have been some questions. Any further questions at this time from the board? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item 6.01. And now Dr. Holt will join us at the podium. Thank you.
It's okay. Hello. So let me get us situated, and I will invite my team that you all just saw walk into their spots up here. If you want to do that, board, welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you again tonight. Dr. Majors and I are sharing an update. You might notice the setup looks very similar to what you saw at the middle of the year. If we need more chairs, we can get some. We're okay. Good. Okay. Get that. And so we will introduce and allow principals to introduce the teams that they brought. I will say that we do have Bissett Elementary, Hickory Hills is a K-8, but we have middle school sharing a little bit of their story, as well as Parkview High School, and so they will introduce themselves as we go through the presentation here in a little bit. But I just want to start by thanking them each, which we've had multiple conversations and emails, but just to say it publicly, we really appreciate them coming and being a part of the board dialogue tonight, just like we did at middle of the year. So Dr. Majors and I are here to provide you an assessment update. Part of that information tonight will be not only about current data, so end of the year Galileo, which you know is the universal screener that we have been utilizing in our system across the course of this year, but also per the board's request, a little bit of time spent as well on state assessment data. So we'll dig right in so that we, Dr. Majors and I, can stop talking and you can hear from the people who are in the work each and every day. So just a reminder, this slide is probably getting very familiar to you, and I won't round robin it, but I bet at this point you can start to give back to me some of our purposes when we come back up here. But really today's about sharing district level state assessment data, which was a request that came to Dr. Lathan from the Board of Education. I do want to reiterate, this is not end of year assessment data for the current year that we just closed. This is the assessment data from the prior year that we are sharing with the Board of Education. And then we also will spend majority of our time tonight talking about year one implementation of our universal screener, which is Galileo, and how that data has really shaped and informed the instruction we've provided across classrooms and campuses, and really the work we've done in departments and SPS. I always like to tell you what we're not going to do as well. So we aren't going to be sharing all building specific data. The teams you see in front of you have agreed for us to share some of their data, but we won't be giving public information about all building specific data, either state assessment or Galileo, and we're not going to share the standard level specificity tonight either. So our time will be spent in 4 specific areas. Our plan will be that we will be brief on areas 1 and 2, which is the 2021-22 state assessment data, and then just a reminder about how the work continues to align with the larger vision of Dr. Lathan's priorities as well as the strategic plan. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time this evening in end of the year data, which is the reason that you see the spotlight schools that are in front of you, as well as giving you a roll-up summary of how we did from BOY to EOY on the local assessment that we provided internally in SPS. And then, as always, we like to forecast forward to how the data is prompting and informing the decisions that not only building leaders are making on their campuses, but the decision that district leaders are making, that departments across the system, and how we design. So we'll give you a little bit of future work information as well. So we'll start just with brief information around state assessment data. So again, this is 21-22 data, and we wanted to start with MAP, which is the assessment that we give to students in grades 3 through 5. So this is historical MAP data compared to the state. So what you see is trend lines for the state in the dotted red line. Then you see the district comparison in the solid blue line. So you can see that within grade bands that were tested. So we assess 3rd through 5th graders in ELA as well as 6th through 8th graders in ELA, and you can see the information there in comparison to how we internally in SPS are performing in relationship to the state. So grades 3 through 5, SPS was 0.6% below the state average, but in grades 6 through 8, we scored 3.4% above the state average. So that's the ELA data. The formatting is identical for MAP, so we assess MAP as well for math in grades 3 through 5 and in 6 through 8. Exact same dashed and solid lines representing trends for the state as well as for the district. So here you see grades 3 through 5 scoring about 3.8 below the state average and 6-8, 1.8 below the state average. So what you see on this slide is representation of MAP science data. So just to clarify here, we only assess our 5th grade students on science content. However, the standards overlap from things they may have mastered in grades 3 through 5. But the assessment is only given in 5th grade. So just a reminder there to how that looks. You see 5th grade students scoring 1.4% below the state, and 8th grade students 0.2% below in science. So that's middle and elementary. Then we move to EOC, which again stands for end of course exams or data, and that is the state assessment level data that is provided to our high school students. So here, just to clarify, the district data is again represented by the solid line, state data by the dashed line, this time it's green. So you see a slight drop in state data as well as district data related to English 2. SPS students score about 6% lower than the state there. In biology, a drop of 1% from 2001 and a gap of 8% between SPS and the state. And in government, which is essentially the social studies metric we're talking about here, both the state and district experience drops in scores, with SPS is showing a drop of about 5%. And then we move to math. Algebra 1, an increase of about 1%, while the state average increase was 6. Algebra 2, state saw an increase of 5, while SPS was a decrease. And in geometry, obviously you'll notice SPS is significantly higher than the state. And again, that is a very small percentage of students who take the geometry EOC in high school. The final metrics for high school deal specifically with the ACT test. And then of course, the state requires us measuring the metric of graduation rate. So the graph shows the graduation rate over time as compared to the state average. And then what you see on the left is the ACT composite score by year. The district remaining in blue and the state being in red relative to that graphic. And then below is SPS is scoring above the national average. You can see that historical context over time as well. We did, just for your curiosity's sake, take a peek at the national averages as well. And we noticed significant decline at the national level, so that's across the state, right? Not just the state of Missouri, in decline in ACT composite scores since the year 2018. So just for context, we look at that data not just on a state level, but on a national level internally. So the next several slides will show you the differences by grade level or course, depending from 2019 through 22. So this is ELA, both for the assessed grades in MAP as well as EOC, the percent of our students that were proficient or advanced. So green on the next several slides will indicate an increase, while red will show a decrease. So when you look at these, 3rd and 5th grade experienced an increase in ELA, while other courses saw a decrease that ranged anywhere from 0.6 to 7%. Similar formatting, different content. So this is math, MAP, and EOC percentages of students proficient or advanced across the 3 years represented. So you're going to see here increases in 6th grade and Algebra 2 between 2021 and 2022. 6th grade math decrease of less than 1%, Algebra 2 decreased by less than 3%, and 5th and 7th grade saw close to a 7% increase. And finally, Science and Social Studies map and EOC. You can see the grade levels assessed as well as the courses here as well. So our Science and Social Studies scores were increased in 5th and 8th, while biology saw a slight decrease. And in government, an approximate 6% decrease in the last year. And the final data from 21-22 that we'll share is related to subgroup by content area. So this is 3rd through 8th grade students. A decrease here in scores for 9 of the 11 subgroups that are listed. 2 subgroups, Hispanic students as well as our IEP students, are showing a maintaining there as you look across the years. And then similar data again for the content area of math. Proficient and advanced percentages here. Subgroup data for 3rd through 8th grade, you'll notice growth in all subgroups with the exception of students who have an IEP, and these scores were maintained at about 7%. And finally, science assessments for students in 3rd through 8th grade. So we saw growth in 7 of the 11 subgroups listed here. Students who have an IEP and students who are on free and reduced maintained their scores from 21 to 22, while our ELA students saw a slight decline.
Okay, good evening, board. Now we are going to shift from 2022 MAP data and look at this year's Galileo data. So we'll start with district alignment and timeline. So as a reminder, implementation of the universal screener is aligned to the 2022-23 superintendent goals, which you'll see on the left, as well as the 3 academic priorities that you'll see on the right. I'm not going to repeat them to you because you've heard them multiple times this year. Okay, so also as shared previously, our Galileo District Success Plan included 3 goals, which have all been accomplished in the 2022-23 school year. Okay, here you'll see our district-wide assessment windows, all of which were completed. Today we'll be sharing results specifically from our end-of-the-year Galileo benchmark, so the May 1st through May 19th window. Okay, at the middle of the year we shared Galileo by the numbers. We wanted to provide an update to you tonight. So 113,783 benchmark assessments were administered. And then you'll notice next to Galileo teacher training sessions, at the start of this, from beginning of the year to middle of the year, we hosted 484 professional learning sessions for teachers. From middle of the year to end of the year, that really shifted to job embedded support from the site leader or a site instructional coach. And then you'll notice that 139,351 Galileo common formative assessments were created by teacher. And then the last line is something that you did not see at middle of the year. If you remember, we surveyed teachers after the middle of the year board presentation, and teachers requested to shift that assessment window. So with that shift, we had a large number of teachers who still wanted an interim assessment at the end of 3rd quarter to provide data to inform instruction in 4th quarter. And that's what that interim assessment is. We offered that, and 9,816 interim assessments were given. Okay, when we shared data in January after the middle of the year testing window, we really dove into a results orientation to share the why behind assessment within SPS. So you'll recall that a results orientation is all about action and converting the data to new knowledge that drives change and ultimately to change in instructional practices within the classroom.
So as we follow up with actually the end of year data that came from our local assessment, the large part of this presentation tonight will be you hearing from our spotlight schools on how they have used the local assessment data to drive instruction and seen positive outcomes for their teachers and for students as they really use that data to shape and inform what they were doing in classrooms across the district. So we'll spend a bulk of time there, as well as sharing with you, okay, we've seen from these 3 schools, but what does that look like in a district roll-up? So we'll end with that layer of data. So before I turn it over to them, we want to give you some context as a reminder, and I know you received both the presentation in advance as well as the information sheet giving you the background again about the interpretation of data, but just to make sure we're all speaking the same language and on the same page, a reminder about the quadrants. So you will see data at the district level as well as at each of these specific buildings in scatter plot form. So you've seen that already, you've previewed some of that, but a reminder is we want to see kids moving above the blue line. It's green on my screen, but it kind of looks blue up there. Meaning the goal is that we want all of our kids in quadrant 1, which is really about students who are meeting growth. That means they grew at the rate we expected them to grow, and they scored proficient or advanced, okay? If you'll recall in our APR conversations, that is the way that the state allocates points, right? We get points for kids being proficient or advanced, saying, yep, they are proficient or advanced on their assessments, but we also, in the new version of MSIP 6, right, we also can attain points for growth. And that is moving not only within bands, but not only 2 different bands, so from basic to proficient, but also growing within a band. So quadrant 1 is the goal. We want all our kids leaving us proficient and growing. What we know is the reality is that that is likely not going to be always the case, right? So if students aren't going to be in quadrant 1, that's a hard word, then we want them to live either in quadrant 4, okay? I am proficient or advanced, but maybe it's a little bit harder to grow me from beginning of year to end of year because I started maybe proficient or advanced already, right? Or we want them in quadrant 2 saying, okay, but from where a teacher got you or where you were at a building, where you started the year, you grew at the rate we expected you to grow, okay? So we know that both quadrant 4 and quadrant 2 come with liabilities, right? The liability in quadrant 4 is that those kids were already proficient, but they didn't grow. So what are we doing to support those students? And the liability to quadrant 2 is that you grew, but you're still not proficient. So we recognize that. But we want to see our scatter plots shifting up and to the right. Okay, so just to situate. Quadrant 3 is all of our students who maybe they didn't meet their expected growth and they're still not proficient. So just that context again for me to speak it to you before we start to show the graphs. So before we talk to Bissett Elementary, who's going to share in just a little bit, we wanted to show you district level scatter plot data allocated within the quadrant. Okay, so this is what we shared a different school, but you saw a school at the middle of the year that showed this graphic, right? So this is 5th grade data from the beginning of the year Galileo assessment to the middle of the year. So you can see a large cluster right in the hub in the center of the data, and then data points out from there. A lot more students in that quadrant 3 than in any of the other quadrants. So that's what it looked like from our beginning of the year to the middle of the year. Here is the graphic from beginning of year to end of year. So where they scored at BOI compared to how that ended at EOI. So you can immediately see, right, the shifts between quadrants. So if you just look at quadrant 1, we started the year with 12% in that quadrant. We're ending the year with 19%. Remember, the number in parentheses is the number of students. Okay? So we just wanted to give you some context for 5th grade because the next slide is going to show you Bissett's 5th grade data. So we have with us Erica Rosenbaum, who's the principal at Bissett Elementary. Michelle Barker, 5th grade teacher, is here, as well as Haley, I don't want to say it wrong, Beeler, learning coach. So let me give you a peek into Bissett data, and then I'm going to turn it over to them to talk. So again, same information, what Bissett data looked like for 5th grade at BOI to MOI. So you can see how their dots are spread out and allocated, representing a student for each dot. And then you can see that shift we were talking about, right? Up and over. So you can see tremendous growth from moving kids out of quadrant 3, specifically. You see other good things too, but that is really one. When you think about 47% of their 5th graders started in quadrant 3 at the beginning of the year, right? Now they're showing only 18%. So we said, would you please kindly come share, right, with us? So let me give one more layer of data so that if you want to reference it, you can, okay? So here's what that data looked like between each of those assessment points. by grade level. So here's the LA for BISSET from BOY Proficient or Advanced to students who were MOY Proficient or Advanced to the EOI. So what you see here is growth across all of their grade levels except for one, right? So this kind of data gives our principal really good information, right, about what needs to occur, where we might need to scale practices that are occurring in one grade level to another. So you can see a lot of green. I'm hoping your eye is going to 5th grade. That's the team I have here, right? Because that's tremendous growth. And then you see the same when you go to the other content area of math, with everyone being in the green. So definitely something to celebrate, and we would love to hear from your team. So Crystal and I will step to the side and sit, and we'll turn it over to you. No, you can stay.
Okay. So this year, with Galileo being a new assessment, it took us some time to get used to the reports that we could pull, but I feel like by the middle of the year, after that, we were kind of getting in a groove. So how we used Galileo data was we looked at, during our professional learning team, we looked at the lower standards of things that we needed to reteach. So that we pulled those standards out and we made a plan as a team collaboratively of how are we going to reteach these standards. And then we also made common formative assessments, and we revisited that data again and again until we got students where we wanted them to be on that standard. So really it was about more just coming around the data and collaborating. The data gave us a great starting point from Galileo to dive deeper into the standards. And one thing I appreciate about it is that it does give standard-specific data to dig into. Where previously we might not have had that, now we can pull out those standards and it really helps inform next steps for instruction. So I do have my coach and teacher here, and I was going to give them an opportunity to talk a little bit about how we use that data in professional learning teams. If you want to start, Haley?
Okay. The Galileo assessment really helped. My job is all looking at the Galileo assessment and helping teachers analyze their data to make instructional decisions. So now that it's content standard specific, it was really easy to partner with teacher teams to say, hey, look what we're scoring here. We did really well here. Like, we have to celebrate. So celebrate, and then go in and plan with them, model with them, and really talk about what is this standard asking. That was a big thing that we took the time to do this year, and it really helped us through the collaboration process.
I agree. It helped to look at the data. It opened our eyes to see, okay, what do we need to work on, and let's dig deeper. And it helped a lot to have support from a learning coach who wants to do her best, because she's always there to help us. She plans with us the full entire hour. What can we do to make this better? Let's find resources to get the kids engaged and motivated to want to bring up scores and to succeed in these standards. So they rocked it.
So I feel like second semester we really got in the groove of professional learning teams and looking at those CFAs, tracking that data. The interim assessment helped tremendously, because at that point in the year, right before fourth quarter, we were looking at old data. We were looking at middle of the year data. We needed fresh data to propel us forward. So that really made a big difference. And I had all of my teachers do ELA interim, and then I gave math as an option, because ELA was a big focus at our school this year. And all but one team, and I think it was like my first grade team, gave the math interim assessment, because they really wanted to see where their kids were and drive that instruction. So from that interim assessment, we were able to pull out the bottom 3 standards in both reading and math and really intentionally plan around those for next steps for instruction. So as a leader, it helps me to see where teachers need support, and then I collaborate with my coach of, hey, okay, let's tag team this. Are you going to support this teacher? I'll support this one. Or you go in and do a coaching cycle, I'll come back and give feedback on what you coached on. And then the Galileo data really tied well into our basic elements of teaching, which is our professional learning this year, because we were able to talk about the different instructional strategies that the teachers need to utilize moving forward that might meet the learners' needs. And one thing that was really impactful with us this year and our students is goal setting. So all teachers did goal setting with students. We used percentage of standards met. We didn't use proficiency levels because those come out a couple weeks after taking the test, and we want our students to see the feedback immediately. So before each assessment, beginning, middle, and end of the year, each teacher would talk to students and goal set with them. We tried to push them for 20% growth at middle and 20% growth at ed. And if they were 4, we really wanted them to be 70% if possible. That was kind of our goal, 70% standards met. And so the teachers, when they goal set with them, they also talked about, so how are you going to do that? How are you going to get there? What's your strategy for getting there? And then I always had 2 people in the classroom assessing so that teachers could immediately pull kids over and show them their growth right then. And I'm going to tell you, that was cool. I was in classrooms and I saw kids that started at 3% and ended at 75%. And if you are intentional about the reports you pull, you can see that growth. Now, it's harder with Galileo to pull those reports, but if you dig and find them, you can see that growth. And so I think that it's just being intentional about what you're looking at to see that growth. So that was a big driving force for our students, and it gave them that buy-in. And they loved it. They loved celebrating with the teachers right then and there, that growth.
Thank you. Sorry. So we're going to move to 7th grade now because we've got our Hickory Hills middle school friends here with us to talk about that. So same format before they share, just giving you context. So here's 7th grade math district data, BOY to MOI. And then you can see the shift from BOY to EOI. So data looks a little bit different for 7th grade, right? With a lot more maintaining happening across quadrants 4 and 1. And actually some data showing, right, that kids moved from some of the more preferred quadrants into quadrant 3, which is not what we want to see. But the reason you have Hickory in front of you in a moment is because we want to highlight, while we're seeing something at the district level, when we look at data, we see schools that we want to feature to say, what are you doing there when data looks different than a roll-up data at a district level? Because it's all about finding the best practices where teachers and leaders are driving instruction in a way that's getting gains and supporting students with mastery. And so Becky is here, Becky Ash, the principal at Hickory Hills K-8, as well as Heather Killian, which is the 7th grade math teacher there, one of them at Hickory. So let's look at their data before they talk to you and share their story. So here is 7th grade math data at Hickory from BOY to MOY. So you can definitely see they started with a little, a better place to start maybe than our friends at Bissett that you saw. But what I want you to really focus in on is how that trajectory again continued to move. So we're seeing percentages shift right from quadrant 4 over, as well as, I mean, we're seeing similar, right? We had a similar to what the district is doing is trending there as far as kids into quadrant 3, but moving kids from quadrant 2 to 1. So let's look at their overarching data in another way before Becky and Heather share. So here you can see 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and again, we do have some middle school students that take the Algebra 1 EOC as well. So here, or this would still be their Galileo, but you can see percentages increase for 7th grade, 8th grade, and our Algebra 1 students related to percent proficient or advanced across their middle school. Oop. And let me put in, sorry Becky, I got click happy. So please, share with us a little bit about how you made the gains that you did.
Well, thank you so much for having us tonight. It is really a pleasure to be able to celebrate some of the successes that we're seeing at Hickory. Joining me is Heather Killian. She is our 7th grade math teacher and our math department head. And so you'll get to hear a little bit about what is making her kids stand out and what her plans are for the future. But there were 2 things that we really focused on this year. So Galileo was new, and there's a lot of learning that we still need to do regarding the platform. And we know that that'll continue to come over time. But the one thing we knew would stay the same are the priority standards that Nessie has outlined for us. Galileo gives us that report. We can see who has mastered which standards, how they're growing, at what level of rigor are they being tested, and how are they performing on those standards. And so that's where we really put our focus this year, was on those priority standards. I was able to meet with my professional learning teams every month, discuss with them what standards have you taught, how are the kids mastering those standards. If they are not, how are we intervening? And if they have mastered them, how are we extending that learning flow? Those were really rich conversations that happen each and every month in our building, and we know that that will continue as we move ahead to the future. And then the second thing that we did that I think was really powerful is we put more ownership of the learning in the students' hands. So teachers know all the time, what did my kids learn? Where are we at? But do kids always know that? And what we found is that when we started tracking, how are they doing, and sharing with kids, like, here's what you've mastered, that here are growth opportunities. And we made that really visible. Kids started taking ownership of their own learning. And it actually turned into, it was really funny. They would take tests, they would take these assessments and then be like, barely missed that one, or I finally got it. And they would talk about, I was prepared for this question, and then they didn't even ask me a summarizing question on this assessment, but they knew what they were expected to learn, and they were ready to step up and show that they could do it. And so I think those were the two things that really led to a lot of our success. Heather will share her journey this year and where we're headed in the future. So a lot of good things happening.
Thank you for having me. I'm really so thrilled. Becky knows I geek out on data. I geek out on data. I hadn't seen that data until Becky sent it to me. Now, I could see the kids' data, but I couldn't see it in that way. And once I figured out what all the quadrants were after watching the January board meeting, then I got it. But so exciting. I will say, and I can speak to a little bit with the goal setting with the kids, when you were saying, I'm like, oh yes, for sure. There was a learning curve, well, there's still a learning curve, but between iReady and Galileo, because their results come back and they see a percentage, and quite frankly, a lot of them freaked out because they would see like 42% and think, oh, I failed. So at the middle of the year, I really had to, once I did get their goal setting and give them their scores, I had to explain to them, look guys, I have taught 3 of 8 units in the whole year, because we tested the end of November, so it was pretty quick. So that's about 38% of the standards for the entire 7th grade. So if you got a 42%, fail. And that was something that I really had to show them, and then was able to, and I actually got this from another colleague in English, he was doing the same thing, it was so powerful, is to take the priority standards, and I had a chart in my room that was visible to students at all times, and myself, I could refer back to, that showed each priority standard, and then it would have red for if, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, if they were between 0 and 25%. So basically, if they were below basic on that standard, it would be red. And then yellow would be the next 25%, green, and then blue. So they visually could see, and I had it broken out between each class period, how their class did on each standard. Then I was very intentional about telling them, okay, you see all this red? I'll do that again. So it is not unexpected that you don't red there because we have. So I was able to then say, okay, we want the red to go up to yellow, to go up to green, and kind of go through that. Then when I was teaching, could refer back to that and say, okay, this is where we were, this is where we need to be. So that was really powerful for them. Once they understood the percentages, then they really were eager to get that percentage up. So what I ended up doing with them for the last quarter was I was able to use the formative assessments in Galileo. And keeping in mind that the Galileo question bank was supposedly aligning, I'm trusting in this is what we're told is aligning with math, then I could prepare them for Galileo testing as well as math. And while I was still teaching new content because I hadn't covered it all yet, I was able to take some formative assessment questions and would give them kind of a warm-up each day, reviewing because we all know they're gonna forget some, and was able to pull one each day, so they got used to coming in, and they would have an assessment of one question is all I would do. I pulled it from Galileo and put it actually in Canvas so that it was easier to get to for them. And then, so Tuesday through Friday, we would have one standard, and that they would, and then they, of course, go over it with them. The most powerful thing, I think, was when we're in IM and we're in Desmos, yes, I can see then if they're mastering standards. However, it was very apparent, pretty quickly, that Galileo was asking yes questions on the same standard, but they were asked in a little bit different way, where students didn't understand. Well, when I would review it with them and I explained it, they would say, "Really? That's what we're asking?" So I think it was so powerful to have those questions that the question bank to pull from, so that they could see what the question is asked like in Galileo, which is the language map, to help their success. And oh my goodness, it did. They were that when they took that end of year test, so many of them, when they come back to class, and I'm like, "So, what did you think?" And they're like, "That was easy," I'm like, "Oh," because that is so just for me. I seriously have goosebumps talking about it, because for me, and Becky was so awesome about incentivizing them, and she called it the Super Bowl. Like, this is the Super Bowl of the year, guys, and I jumped right on that, and they were so excited with Christine, her incentives, because that really, I know they really love the incentives, but then the self-efficacy throughout the process for those students when they found that success was really great. So I tell the kids, I work hard for you, you work hard for me, and they did it, so it was great.
One thing to highlight about Heather is that she is, in the education world, what we would call instructionally agile. And she will shift based on what the kids need at that time. So instead of just teaching, cover to cover, so to speak, she will adapt and change based on what the data is telling her.
She's changing, she's changing.
She does that in class.
But Heather will adapt and change based on what the data says that our kids need. And so I think that really goes a long way. It keeps the kids engaged. They know that that when they sit down to take an assessment, they know that how they perform matters, and that their next piece of instruction will be based on that. So really,
and I'm very much with them, telling them, okay, here's the reason why we are skipping over this and coming back to it, because this is a unit that we rarely ever get to, and it looks like a large percentage of that's beyond this test year. So it's important that you know this, and the relationships that you build, that always is a big part of it too. When they believe and trust and just go with what you say, because they know you care.
Moving forward, Hickory's plan is to continue not only to use the priority standards, but as the district moves forward with essential standards, that our departments will continue to break down those essential standards even further, and then use assessment data that is specific to that. And really, those essential standards transcend, just what is on the end of year assessments, but what do they need to know that's a lifelong skill. So as they move from grade level to grade level, how can we ensure that they're getting everything that they need to be successful not only in school, but as they move into college, career, and hopefully.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Heather. So last and final spotlight school is Parkview, and before we hear from them, I want to just highlight a little bit of data that's applicable to high school. So 9th grade ELA, you heard from math at the middle school level, ELA now at the high school level. So here is the BOY to MOY scatter plot showing the distribution within the quadrants. And then get ready to celebrate. Here is the BOY to EOY. So can see significant movement there, and a lot of that, I will tell you, is because of the data that you're going to see at Parkview. Yes, they're one of 5, 6 if we take into student account high schools, but when you have scores that look like that, especially at a specific building, it does show growth across the district as well. So with us, joining us from Parkview High School is the official July 1 new principal of Parkview, Megan Brown. Natalie wished that she could be with you tonight, but she is on vacation in sunny Punta Gorda, so we're going to wish her well and be jealous as well. And then, so Megan is here, and she has with her Lisa Portel, Tiffany Taylor, and Cameron Short, who are representatives of the 9th grade ELA team at Parkview. So let's look at their data before they take over. So again, you're now seeing the distribution just for 9th graders in ELA at Parkview from the beginning of the Y at the top of the screen, and then significant shift from BOI to EOI. Again, that movement from below the line and then movement over as well. And again, no students within quadrant 2 means that we moved a lot of kids to other places, as well as that distribution that was below in quadrant 3 shifting up and over. So significant movement there for our freshmen. I say that that's important because this is our group that's starting out, right? So if we can get them in a trajectory of proficiency early, we are setting them up for such high levels of success as they depart us 3 years from now. So here is the data again. You see the 9th grade team is the team that you have with you, and you can see that growth. And then as you look at 10th, 11th, and 12th, right, we have work to do. But I think this team will talk about the work that they've done, which will be a driver to support work across the campus. So Megan, we'll turn it over to you.
Hello. So this evening I have Lisa Portel, our department chair, and then Pam Short and Tiffany Taylor are both part of our English 1 professional learning team. So I was also over ELA as the assistant principal, so my focus in leading this team, I led professional learning as well as English. And this year, our main goals, and I did focus more on the ELA, on the 9th grade ELA, solely because we had 2 teachers that were new to Parkview, one being brand new to teaching, and then Ms. Taylor has been at Parkview now for a few years, but I felt at the beginning that that was where the support was needed. They proved me wrong, probably. But our main 2 focuses, 1, alignment, and then 2, very intentional instructional feedback. I was constantly in their classrooms, and I've told them many, many times they were the team that took the feedback and it was immediately implemented into their classrooms. We made sure that we were maximizing that 90-minute instructional block using our basic elements of teaching and really focusing on small group instruction to provide interventions to students, as well as extensive extension opportunities for our students. One thing that we've done at Parkview that has really been successful for us is the implementation of Power Hour. That has also given us a lot of time to intervene and help students. But alignment, I believe, is the main key to this team. And I'll turn it over to Pam and Tiffany to tell you exactly what they've done as a team to help our students reach them.
So I can speak to the alignment part of having us, specifically because I was there before and had aligned curriculum with other freshman teachers. So that when we had our new team established, it was very easy to say, like, this has been successful here in years past and may continue to be successful and we need to change. And so when we met over the summer a couple of times, and then especially early on in the school year, just outside of time built in for us to really look at those books that we were teaching and content that we were teaching and make sure it aligned to the standards very specifically and intentionally, so that when we started our school year, we could all be on the same page, teaching the same standards and honing in on the same practices. So for the entire duration of the year, we were within a day or 2 of each other for every class period. So if you came into my room and I was working on bell work, and we stayed for 20 minutes, you would go into his room and
So I spent my first 3 years at high school. So coming in as my first year at Parkview, being a collaborative team was such a blessing, especially when the weight of curriculum is kind of lifted off your shoulders because we really had solid curriculum created by Ms. Taylor. And so we were able to implement, especially, so data as an English teacher is not my first language. So it's something I've been trying to learn. So I remember we had this meeting around October-ish with Principal Brown. He was really sick, to be honest. And one of the things we wanted to focus on was using our tools and maximizing them. So we wanted to challenge ourselves with finding ways to use the Galileo outside of just the benchmark. So we started implementing pre and post tests through some of the pre-generated questions that they have. Because so much of test success, I feel like, is test language. So we might be testing them and going over these standards, but until they see the questions and how they're going to be asked different standards, I don't think they'll be as successful. So I think that's where I saw the most growth was from the pre-test and post-test, and I think that's why, especially, we did see a little bit of a roll at the middle of the year, but when we started pushing that, our numbers went right back up. So, yeah.
And to add to that, I think using the pre and post test is such a good idea. And then implementing them, we would have students take the test, and then we would have the data for the next class period, so we knew exactly how students had performed, what they were mastering, and what they were struggling with. So our first start of the year unit focused on inferencing. We had them take the assessment. They did not do well on inferencing. We created a 3-week unit that focused on inferencing, had them take an assessment again, and could see that incredible growth. So being able to have the results immediately to then differentiate our instruction or change things or focus on what students needed was really helpful. To then carry that on throughout the rest of the year. So when we got to the fourth quarter and we asked our students to apply that skill in a completely different context, they knew how to do it because they've been practicing it. They practiced it very intentionally. I think it also helped familiarize them with Galileo and the system. So then when they had to take those district benchmarks, they weren't afraid of it or had never seen it before. They were taking Galileo tests every month, sometimes twice a month. So they knew, and sometimes they were short little 3-question quizzes, sometimes they were 10 questions, sometimes they were benchmarks that are a little bit longer. Our students weren't scared, I guess, of the testing system. And then when we would get those results back, we were able to go over the tests with them in the next class period and kind of, like you were saying, analyze exactly where we went wrong with the questions, where we struggled, how we would be successful if we tried to do it again. And we got to model how to take the test to them, and they got to practice it that next class period as well. So,
I would just like to add, I had 2 freshman classes that were on this process. I was not part of this, but from the beginning, they were tasked with spending their PLT time, really looking at the data, incorporating Galileo. They did not waste their PLT time. They did not spend it complaining. If one of them was gone, the other 2 would pick right back up and continue working. Ms. Brown also let us have a testing celebration this year, and that was highly motivating because if you work with like 15-year-olds and they're like, you try really hard on this test, they're going to be like, what? But the testing celebration really motivated a lot of them, and then the practice, the basement, it just kind of took away some of that, like, oh, the test, it's kind of made it a regular thing. We kind of applied that with our EOC stuff as well, so we're hopeful that shows there as well.
So just in closing, for us, I think as we continue, and especially trying to grow our other areas, we will continue our focus on alignment. A big piece to this, obviously, is collaboration and the team. They work very well together, and that doesn't always happen naturally. But alignment is key, and then just maximizing every instructional minute that we have within our day and giving very intentional feedback to teachers so they can quickly implement that into the classrooms. But
So they're going to remain, right? We're going to do district data and then give you some quick next steps. both based on the end of the year data and then as we move into next year. And then you'll have an opportunity if you have specific questions for any of the campuses as well as for Dr. Majors, and I will do that at the end. But just a couple of things I want to point out from what you heard before we move into the district data is one of the things that Dr. Majors and I, as well as the executive directors of learning, have been incredibly passionate about is consistency. Megan just said it, alignment, and process, right? Because what we know is that programs will come and go. So whatever the thing is, but if we can teach the processes of what you just heard from Parkview, then we can actually move the data. And so that work of creating sound and solid processes is timely. And sometimes we can become discouraged, and I think all of them right here would say there were discouraging moments across the course of the year, and are still some, like I'm sure Megan would say. I still see just some discouragement when I look at that end of the year data, right? But if we continue to build and focus on the consistency of our processes, we are confident that we are going to have greater movement for more of our kiddos. And so I'm just pleased that you heard some of those things that are already on our radar resonating as we talk to just 3 of our campuses tonight.
Okay, so to wrap up tonight, we're going to provide similar data but district level data by grade and by course. So for ease of understanding, you'll see the data both in chart and table form. So on this first chart, I'll give you a little more information so that you can orient yourself to the way the data is presented, and then we'll share multiple grade levels and content. So we're going to start with elementary ELA data. You'll see that the data is color-coded similarly to the quadrant. So you'll see the key at the top. So in dark green for each grade level, you'll see the percentage of growth for students who met expected growth and scored proficient or advanced from beginning of the year to end of year. For example, so if I could direct your attention to first grade, you'll notice that 29% more students scored proficient or advanced and met expected growth at the end of the year than did at the beginning of the year. So when you see a slide formatted in this way, it's all about growth. Okay, the next slide, you'll see grade level proficiency from beginning of the year to end of the year. So I want to remind you that we know that when providing a DL or a scale score for a student, IRT analysis takes into account the number of instructional days. And so prior to the testing window. So therefore we would expect that a student would know more on the end of the year benchmark than they would at the beginning or the middle of the year benchmark. So you may not see large shifts in percentages because we would expect them to know more based on the instructional days. So in ELA on this slide, we saw the 3.6% increase in 5th grade, 2.4 in K, and 1.3 in 2nd grade. And then in 1st and 4th, we saw close to a 2% decrease in elementary ELA. Okay, here you'll see, again, same format as not the previous, but the slide ahead of that. This is the same slide, but for math. So again, this is all about growth. So again, in 1st grade, 36% more students scored proficient or advanced or met expected growth at the EOY than the EOY. And then here you'll see similar data to ELA, but this is the math data. So in math, we saw a 3.5% and 4% increase in 1st and 5th. All other grade levels were just above or below a 1% decrease. Okay, now we're going to shift to show you some district-wide middle school data. So here again, same format. And then here, this is grade level proficiency from beginning of the year to end of the year. And then on the right column, you'll see the difference. So 1.6% growth in 6th grade. And then you'll see a decrease in 7th and 8th. Okay, here again, this is 6-8 math, beginning of the year to end of the year. And then again, similar format. You'll see growth from beginning of the year to end of the year, and then the difference. You'll notice positive trends in 6th and 8th with a slight decrease in 7th grade data. Okay, we'll shift to high school data. So here you may notice that the 11th and 12th grade data looks quite red. I want to remind you that this is the first year that we have utilized a universal screener in high school. So the 11th, the standards that are tested in 12th grade are the same standards that are tested in 11th grade. So in the fall, you will be receiving, in our fall academic update, you'll be receiving some strategies that we have already put into place for next year to incentivize students in making the test more meaningful so that teachers can utilize that data to drive instruction. Okay, again, proficiency for high school ELA. And then here, we'll shift to math. And then again, grade level proficiency for high school math. In Algebra 1, geometry, and Algebra 2. You'll notice a 3.1% decrease and then very slight decrease in geometry and Algebra 2. Okay, so what you'll see on this slide is district-wide growth. So this is expected and actual growth by grade level. So you'll notice the grade levels that met their expected growth on the EOY benchmark are highlighted green. So every student receives a scale score on the benchmark. So in the expected growth column, that is the number of points that we would expect a student to score higher at the end of the year. So what you see on the right is the average of each, for instance, kindergarten, the 59 is the average of points that students received for growth as an increase. And so you'll notice on the left, kindergarten and 9th grade achieved the district average number of students achieved there. They met their actual growth. And then on the right, you'll notice a larger number of grade levels and content or course-specific contents met their actual growth.
So we always like to leave you with, so what's the now what, right? So what are we doing with the information we have? And so we're going to situate this into things we've already done, right? Because we saw things at middle of the year that propelled us to take different courses than we may or may not have thought we would based on the data, and as well as things we see at end of the year that we know are going to be a part of the work of the coming years. So the first, this is the response to data of what we've done across this year or what we've done since MOY to drive change in the data, because data is just data if you're not taking action on it, right? We can collect all the data in the world, but if we don't use it to actually change practice or take action not only at the district level but at the site level, then it's meaningless. So at middle of the year, we brought you a number of visits that our executive directors were making to schools, and so I'm happy to report that our executive directors of learning, so this includes the ones over each of our division, completed over 979 visits to campuses to meet with leaders and to be a part of PLTs or observing PLTs or working with that leader across the course of this year, which is incredible. Many of those visits were related to instructional leadership, almost half of them, so 421 of those visits were all about growing leader capacity to lead the priorities that we've outlined both in the strategic plan as well as in the academic priorities the district has identified. The second largest number for those visits was professional learning communities, which is no surprise to you because that is also one of our academic priorities. We also implemented what we call a DDI, which is a database decision-making protocol, and it was implemented at majority of our sites. And what that does, and some of these people sitting here could speak to it, is it really helps teachers to unpack by standard what the gap might have been for the students as a result of the data that they received either on a common formative assessment that they gave or on one of these benchmark opportunities. So taking the data, taking apart that and figuring out what the discrepancy is for the students that actually scored that way. So this is a new protocol that we've been using, and many of our sites took advantage of digging into the granular level of that data, and executive directors supported our principals with leading those protocols on campuses. We also knew coming into this year that we were going to be redesigning our building school improvement plans that were previously called school action plans. The board approved, obviously, a new CSIP or a new strategic plan, and so it was important to us that we, at the academic team, made sure that the plans that buildings were incorporating on their campuses aligned to the new CSIP. And so our design and how we deployed that at the event we're going to talk about in just a minute was very strategic. We tightened our consistency on action steps and provided campuses real action steps to walk through and follow versus prior processes, which have been giving a little bit more autonomy to them to say, here's the action we'll take. We didn't take all that away, but we outlined very clearly some of the non-negotiable action steps that they would be working through in ELA, math, and as they talk about culture on their campus. And we deployed that at Lead Forward, which is the picture that you see there on the right of the screen, which we'll talk about in a minute. But even beyond that, so every campus will have a building school improvement plan that is the driver for the work that's happening on their campuses. But we identified schools that were in the bottom 5% as identified by the state, in addition to any schools that in our district that have been labeled as comprehensive campuses. And we took those leaders through turnaround meetings, and they have additional plans, which I think Dr. Latham will talk about here in just a little bit. They have additional support plans that we developed that are in addition to some of the district expectations. Here are the other things that we as the district are going to implement and support you with implementing on your campus, because we see and recognize the struggle that the data is revealing for your campuses. So I think she's going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So I just want to, I would be remiss not to highlight our Lead Forward Institute, which was an amazing, and I am going to say, how many of the teachers up here were a part of Lead Forward? Couple, okay. So we invited building principals as well as coaches and guiding coalition members, so think leadership team, but with a different purpose, to 2 days of pretty intensive learning from Solution Tree experts. So from that organization, we had speakers come in that focused specifically on the development, the maintenance, and the sustainability of professional learning communities, because we know that collaboration is the driver of improved performance on campuses. And we had over 500 SPS staff that participated in that day. And if you're on Twitter at all, I'm sure you saw a fury of posting that was going on about the great learning, the great time of collaboration, and the intentional design of those days to support our leaders with making changes on their campuses. So those are just things that have already occurred as a result of data that we have gotten to shift our metrics relative to academics. And then Dr. Majors is going to share what's happening next.
Can we wait? Let's go with this.
You want to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so board members are sharing with you this document, and we will actually dig into this document much deeper in August at our academic update for the school year. But we wanted to show you, based on the end of the year, the data from last year, the MAP data, the EOC data, and also our Galileo data, how we're moving forward with our schools. And so the first page you see is we have tiered all of our campuses in the district. So we know, based on that tier, if they're level 3, that means they need additional intensive support from a district-wide perspective. If they're level 2, and then level 1, and then you see the criteria of how they were placed in each of these tiers on this first page. So that's one set of information. So let's go to the second page. So the second page, you will then see where our elementary campuses, middle school campuses, and those high school campuses, where they fall at each tier, whether they're level 3, level 2, or a level 1. And then based on the tiers, our executive directors, our learning coaches, and our staff members have been working with each of these campuses as they prepare their building school improvement plan for the upcoming school year. And so that was the work, as Dr. Holt mentioned last week, that they started. And so, for example, let's look at our campuses tonight here. If you look under the level 2 in the middle school, you'll see that Hickory Hills is at the level 2 level there. And so when they went through their discussions, and actually, I'll let you talk about it a little bit more last week, the process that you and your team went through to develop your school plan. Let's just talk about that based on your tier, and then those directives and things that we shared that you needed to include in your particular school improvement plan.
So it was an opportunity with our guiding coalition, which is basically our academic lead team, to be able to go through and look a little bit at our end of year data from Galileo and decide what do we need to do next. So the action steps are pretty clearly lined out for us, but just looking for part of that, and will play a big role in our VSIP as we move forward based on the data. But we'll come back together in early August and meet with the team again to finalize it.
Thank you, Becky. So as you'll see, our board members, when you look across this particular table, where we need to, like I said, spend our focus, where we'll direct our questions as the executive directors go out and meet with the building level principals, sit in on their professional learning team meetings to see what supports we're providing those schools. Now, if you go to the next page, page 3, we talked about those bottom 5% campuses identified by the state based on their performances. Holland Elementary School is one of those. So those bottom 5% campuses have an additional plan called a school turnaround plan. And so this, from the school turnaround plan, you see their demographic data, you see their enrollment by class sizes, like how many students at each kindergarten level, how many classrooms. You see also their attendance rate, which is an area that we need to focus on moving forward for the upcoming school year. Over the past several years, you know, we kind of backed off on those attendance incentives and encouraging based on the pandemic. But as you can see, we need to address that now as we move forward. And then also we share with you the years of experience for staff members on that campus, also teacher retention information. And if you go over to the next page, this is the work that we're going to be focused on supporting those campuses. You see academic achievement in that very far left column. You see growth, how we're going to focus on growing those particular students. Then there are subgroups of students, support that where they need to go, and then we look at attendance. And then at the bottom of the page, you see the different opportunities that are afforded to that particular campus. Shine, they have the before and after school care, Club Encore, which provides tutorial supports. Back in April, we asked you to support a purchase of some additional programming that we're going to use academically as it relates to our Encore programs up in the fall. And then you see Positive Classroom, you see the different supports that we're providing as it relates to culture and addressing behavior supports on particular campuses. And the next page is the root cause. What's causing this particular campus to experience the low performance academically that they are demonstrating right now? And then what are we going to do as a district to support them, and also what the campus is going to do? And you see that at the bottom of the page there. And then on the far right, you see the supports received. Think about supports received, ties right back to the budget of the request as it relates to physicians that we have either added to campuses or additional supports we're providing campuses moving forward. And then the very last page is their APR from the state attached to that. As I shared, we'll go much deeper in the fall as we talk about those campuses, but we wanted you to see how we have not only this particular school year, but moving forward, and you're going to hear more from Dr. Major shortly, responding to the data. Not only Galileo data, but also our state data. And then our next steps, Dr. Major.
Okay, so all instructional coaches and leaders will engage in a literacy instruction reboot this summer. We are very excited. This is 2 full days of learning so that the coach and the leader can come together and partner to determine how they can work together to increase instructional practices at sites. You have heard a lot about the work of the summer curriculum, or the Curriculum Development Council. That work continues this summer. I think we had 3 days full of teams working just last week. You're looking at scope and pacing of curriculum. You heard lots of the teachers talking about instructional agility. So one thing that we've done is we've taken all of our data, the priority standards, and we've really gone back to the curriculum to look at when we're teaching those standards. If we're teaching the standards in 4th quarter after our state assessment, that scope and sequence needs to be fixed. So next year, we will be monitoring district essential standards, 10 for ELA and 10 for math. And so every campus will be reporting that data, so we'll have that roll-up data to share, which will, again, help us hone in on what within the curriculum is working and what needs to be fixed. Teams of teachers are also writing common assessments. And that is not only at the elementary level, that's also at middle and high school content-specific course teams are engaging in the same work this summer. So executive directors are currently, they're not here tonight because they're attending a PLC conference with multiple leaders across the district campuses. So that's one way that we are building their capacity as leaders. And then also Teach Forward redesign. So you've previously heard the term activate, which is when we bring all of the teachers together in August and we provide instructional updates. That will be rebranded as Teach Forward and will be an extension of Lead Forward. So as previously shared, we expanded instructional support for sites and added an additional 12 days of learning for coaches to build the capacity of our instructional coaches to provide job-embedded professional learning at sites through this school year. We know that the closer they can get to the instruction that's happening in the classroom, the more impactful their work will be. Executive directors are currently working alongside the University of Missouri to develop a K-12 PBIS PL plan to support student behavior across campuses. One thing that I wanted to share in addition to what's on this slide is you looked at all of the quadrant data, and one thing when Dr. Lathan, Dr. Holt, and I sat down and initially looked at that data, a question that we had is all of those students who are in that bottom left quadrant, what are we doing for them? So it's not enough to say they're in the bottom, we're moving them on, but what are we doing to target them specifically? So currently we're looking at every single student within that quadrant, and are they attending Club Encore? Are they attending Explore? And so we'll be looking at that data at a district level. So what district level supports do we need to move those kids out of that quadrant? And then also at the site level. So what supports do we need to implement at the site level to support those students so we can move them out of that quadrant?
You've heard a little bit about what we've already done and what we're continuing to do, and we were able to share some data with you. I've already publicly thanked the teams that are with us, but I definitely think they deserve a round of applause for coming and joining you tonight. And with that, questions for them, curiosities, wonderings, need-to-knows, or what insights might we provide? I would suggest, with the permission of the president and the superintendent, that questions directed to the teams come first, and then maybe we can dismiss them to be on their way to their families. And then if there are additional questions for Dr. Meters or myself, that we could save those.
That would be fine. Thank you, each and every one of you, for being here tonight and taking time away from your family and loved ones, and for willing to just open up to the board. I know that it can be a little intimidating to be here, but we really do appreciate an inside look on what's going on in the classroom, because that's what all the hard work is going on. So with that, do any of my fellow board members have questions, comments that we can begin? Yes.
If I may, hey, let me ask, this at elementary, on the institution of Galileo, initially, did you have any pushback? How did you kind of receive that? And now, as you look at it today, how do you gauge that, or how you feel about that?
Yes, we did have major pushback. I'm not gonna lie, we did. But through the process, and even in the middle of the year, we kind of were freaked out. There was kind of a panic time, and it did not feel good. But it drove us to be more intentional, and we have pretty much a brand new staff to really focus on what we were already doing well, and then highlight areas that we need to really focus on. And I think we all felt really successful at the end of the year. Kids were crying because they were so excited that they met their goal, and we had not had that before. And I've been at that school for 7 years, so I was a teacher first, and then I moved into a coach. So we saw so much growth, and by the end of the year, we all really liked it. And when we started really digging into the standards, we understood the why then.
I think it was very different than iReady, and that's what threw us and threw teachers for a loop. We were so used to seeing like the growth on iReady. That's why I talked about the growth piece earlier, because we want to celebrate the growth in our kids and with our kids. So when you first pull the reports for Galileo, you can't see that necessarily because of the IRT, because how the target kind of moves throughout the year. So we were able to find the reports to see their growth, to celebrate that as well. So I think it's just a matter of understanding how to best use it. And it just took us some time to get used to it. But now my teams really love it, because then they can dig in intentionally with the standards, and we didn't get that before. Like, we were not able to use data from iReady to guide instruction like we can Galileo.
I was personally one to push back. But I just like
very honest.
Because I was comfortable with already, and I don't like change, but it helps to have support. And they're not here reaming me like, you didn't do this. Okay, let's focus on this one thing, and let's succeed in that area, and then move on to the next. And then I get to go play.
It's awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You didn't put her in the
Thank you, all of you.
astronaut costume?
No, it's outside her door.
I know, we should just put you in. I forgot, didn't you?
Other questions or comments from board members?
I just wanted to highlight something that was, I think, stated by one of the teachers at Hickory Hills about, I think it was Hickory Hills, talked about the test language and the students having difficulty with the test language. Who was it?
I think it was.
Okay. I just wanted to highlight how important that is. And it was Parkview because you talked about the pre and post testing and how important that was for helping students to gain confidence in the testing language. And oftentimes, because one of the things that I paid attention to in looking at this report was the difference between the internal district data and the external state data and why we're not seeing the same levels of growth. And part of it is the difference in testing language and students being familiar with that ability to go back and forth, to have that linguistic flexibility to drive their cognitive flexibility, right? So if they have the language to go back and forth to these different contexts of how the data, the questions are being asked, or how what they're expected to do, it gives them more confidence and the ability to be more flexible to those different contexts. So I thought that was really important thing to talk about, and I really appreciated the principal at Parkview talking about the things that were really important, because it's something that I've pointed out before with regards to some of the pushback we see from teachers regarding new things, but the fidelity makes a big difference when you were doing the program as it's meant to be done. And one of the difference between iReady and Galileo is the ability to use progress monitoring data for guiding instruction. When you had iReady, it just is for progress monitoring. It tells you what the students is doing, but it doesn't give you that information about how to use that data for instruction. And that's the piece that I think really helps all of these schools demonstrate that improvement. And I think it's important that our other schools are getting on the same bandwagon with regards to that consistency and alignment and that collaborative piece also between the teachers.
And part of that DDI protocol that we touched on as something we implemented around after middle of the year data came back, I would say it was a next step. One of the questions that it poses as they're unpacking the student confusion and discrepancy is what confusing language lives either in the part of the question that they might have seen on Galileo, and then I was in many teams where they went back and said, okay, so let's take up map item analysis or EOC and look at how that question was asked there, because we have those released items to reference. And so even just that kind of conversation to the comparison of the two and what can we glean from a potential way it will be asked in the future, not to teach the test, right, but to clarify confusion of understanding for our kids, so when they encounter something like that in the future, they have the flexibility to know, oh, they're really asking me that and I know how to do that.
And that's that piece of people talking about teaching to the test, whether or not you just teach to the test or whether they have the cognitive flexibility to translate what you've taught them to other contexts. And that's really important part of demonstrating the growth on these standardized tests that are outside of the district's control. The other question that I had was about the summer literacy reboot. One of the concerning things that I saw in this data was that third grade ELA scores for the district. And part of what I understand may be happening is a disconnect between state level literacy expectation and district level literacy expectations with regards to instructional practices, and maybe not having clear alignment between those two things when it comes to the instructional practices and the assessments. So I'm wondering what percentages, particularly of our younger elementary school teachers, are taking advantage of the DESE Letters program training, and whether or not letters will be a part of the instructional reboot for the summer.
Yeah, so teachers do have the opportunity to participate in the letters training through our PDC. We're partnering with them. And then also Dr. Lathan has agreed to pay teachers for a portion of the letters training is online, and the teachers can actually do it at home, but we're paying them for their time to do that. Right now, so the work of the rescoping curriculum, one of the things that we're doing is when we talk about teaching kids phonics and phonological awareness, what DESE has released is the 5 pillars of literacy. So what we're currently doing is taking the 5 pillars and we're aligning all of our instructional frameworks to the 5 pillars, even down to our guided reading lesson plan. So we're taking the letter, scope, and sequence of how phonics and phonological awareness should be taught, and we're applying that to the curriculum. We know that we're adopting new curriculum next year because we're in the ELA curriculum adoption process. But we also know that we're not going to wait a year to make changes that we know need to be made. And so those are changes that will be shared with teachers that teach forward. But that work is happening right now, and it is in exact alignment with DESE's the 5 pillars of literacy.
So I'm on the DESE advisory committee for the new reading standards that they're coming up with for the assessment for literacy. And if we don't make some changes, then our students are going to fail significantly at that 3rd grade below period, because it's a lot of the testing for those kids from 3rd grade and below are going to be based on phonological awareness. And if they don't have those skills, then they're going to fail, and we're going to have a large number of students who are going to be failing that test.
We have a lot of exciting things to share this fall.
I would comment that a couple of different things. As a former teacher of reading, I am always looking for new vocabulary terms, and I picked one up tonight that I'm going to continue to use, and that's instructional agility. I really like that. I mean, that makes sense, and it's what you have to do. So I'll be using it tomorrow in my class at Missouri State, just to impress them, I'm sure. They're all future teachers. I have a question for principals, and maybe it should go to Dr. Majors and Dr. Holt. You have a lot of staff now that's trained with Galileo, and I know you emphasize that there's still more to learn. I get all that. But will you differentiate your professional development for your new teachers coming in? Because all of you will have had some turnover. So what's the plan to differentiate for those that kind of get it, or those that really get it, compared to those that have no clue?
And for me, at the site level, that's where LCs come in. When we're meeting in teams and we're digging into the data together, we're sitting side by side doing that. So we're walking anyone new through it, and also working with their teaching partner. They can have them help them as well. But that's when we do it, is when we come together as a team. So that way we all know where to find the data and how to look at it. And we do data bids within there in that time.
Okay.
They have 4 or 5 additional days, our newest teachers, at the beginning of the school year.
This
called
will be
New
part
Teacher
of it.
Induction. And Galileo has a segment specifically dedicated for brand new learning relative to how to unpack that data when we're tested, all of the things that we trained people on right at the beginning of last year. But then to Erica's point, principals select new teacher liaisons on their campus who are the go-to person for anybody in that cohort of new teachers. And then with our shift to district site-based coaches, right, they have another person. They obviously will have their colleague, that's a new teacher liaison, but they will have another support person at their campus full-time that will also help them. Because it's one thing to hear it right at the beginning of the year, it's a whole nother when you're sitting there in front of it after you've given BOY. Everything you thought you knew is out the window because now you're looking at this. And we saw that with a lot of our teaching staff at the beginning of the year, right, that I knew it, but now that the data's real and in front of me, what are my next steps? So it's equipping those leaders on campuses as well as our principals as well as our district coaches, which is why, again, you see a lot of learning happening across the summer because we have to be ahead of when those new teachers walk into induction, having already trained and supported the people who are going to meet them in their first days.
Okay. One expression, one slogan that I often hear in regard to education is what gets monitored gets done. And I think you all are perfect examples of that. What gets monitored actually gets done. So kudos to you for not only answering the call during the school year and getting it done, but I'm sure some of the teachers and coaches here tonight, maybe when your principal called and said, will you come to the board meeting with me, you might have not wanted to answer that call, but we appreciate you being here. Whether you're the principal sitting here, or you're an instructional coach, or you're a teacher, it is very, as President Kincaid said, it can be very intimidating. You all did an excellent job of selling the content, which is what the best teachers do right now. You sell what you have to learn, what you want kids to learn. So I appreciate the flexibility and all the different ways that the data was presented. I honestly, I never lost interest. I was just watching and listening to everything you all had to say. So the presentation was excellent, and the format was excellent, and we appreciate your passion and your dedication to not only work hard with your students every day, but also to be willing to come here this evening and share your expertise with others. So thank you, and I even have a former Missouri State teacher, one of my former students, sitting here at the panel, which is fun to see too. People get all grown up, you know. Anyway, thank you. I really liked the way this was all presented. Is there anything else I want to say? I don't think so. But I am going to remember that instructional agility.
There's a book too.
I was going to say, we can give you a whole book on it if you want.
Well, maybe that's next.
Any further comments or questions?
I do have one more question. Geometry, okay, that's obviously the outlier. Why?
I've heard that question a little bit tonight, so I think best explained, and we have a sheet that we're happy to provide after the meeting, but it is an anomaly, and it's because of the way the pathway is designed, right? So the math pathway in high school is Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2. However, DESE's EOC priority pathway is Algebra 1, then Algebra 2, then Geometry. So 100% of our SPS students have an Algebra 1 EOC, like that does happen, but they also have to have one state reported test in high school. So the geometry numbers, and we went back and checked again for this year just so we weren't misspeaking, were all scholars, students at?
It's mostly students who take geometry in middle school.
Yep.
And so, and we have, yeah, so in 2019 it was 31 students, 2021 11 students, and then
39.
the data that you saw was 39 students. So it's a small number of kiddos, and most of them are on the advanced track.
Thank you.
It's an anomaly.
Do you have a question?
Not for the educators, but.
I'm not sure who my questions are for.
Okay, who wants to start?
Well, Dr. Holt said we would let them go once
Okay.
we had questions for.
I want to make sure that everybody's talking to them if they need to.
Let me just look at my,
Okay.
I don't see questions that can't be answered, but if I could just make one quick comment, in addition to, yes, thank you for coming, because I've picked up some lingo for things I know, I just don't know what the words are, for the application of the concept. And I really appreciated what you brought up, which is test language. And I heard Mrs. Killian talk about when you're using Desmos and IM, it doesn't necessarily translate to what the MAP test is going to be. So what I think I'm hearing, or what is being presented, is that Galileo is that bridge. Galileo is going to teach you the test language and prepare you. And so and I've already posed this to Dr. Holt about, it would be interesting to look at the autopsy, I call it, which is the MAP scores, right? And see for the fourth grader if that translates to the boy, the beginning of year Galileo for this year. That would be an interesting thing to look at, and would love to just fast forward to next year and look at the end of the year now. A year from now, we'll see what the MAP test was, right? And then that's where the whole test language thing comes into play, and how reliable. Because we think it is, but until we see that. So I picked up that lingo of test language. But can I collectively ask everyone a question on slide? So 25, 27, 30, 32, all of them. And I think it may just be a schematic, and I wish I'd picked it up. I didn't until you see it blown up there. You're like, wait a minute, I didn't notice that before. Is this intentional or is it schematic? Let's say, what slide are you on? Let's do 25.
25, yeah.
when you look at beginning to middle, it looks like, so the green dotted line or blue dotted line for proficiency is sitting at 1,000. But the one for growth, it looks like it moves from 25% to 50%. So the vertical, which it's like, wait a minute, you just made it harder for people to move into quadrant 1 and 2. Was that intentional? Like, can you talk to me? It's repeated for, do you understand what I'm asking?
So we would expect them, right, to have more knowledge when they take an end
So
of
that
the
is
year.
intentional.
Yeah, and that's, you heard somebody say, I can't remember who it was.
So the question, okay, so that relates to the next, so your benchmarks are changing. So when you're asking a fifth grader, and that's why these percentages are so small, because your expectation is increasing, right? With the exception of high school, because that's what I thought was happening. And then in high school, it's like, well, the 9th through 12th grade, it's all the same benchmark? Did somebody say that 9th through 12th?
You talked about the test. Remember you talked about the same standards being tested?
In 11th and 12th.
11th and 12th
Oh,
grade, yes.
Is it? Okay, so my understanding is correct for K-8, right? So your expectation, and that's why that line is moving, shifting, right? And that's why the percentage is getting harder and harder to achieve, and therefore it's getting smaller. But now, I guess for high school, can you talk to me about that? So the standards we're testing, so these 9th graders should all be brilliant when they're in 12th grade, right? Are we going to test the same standards of this cohort next year and the next year?
That was for math, wasn't it? That
And
wasn't.
it's only for 11th and 12th grade, ELA.
ELA for 11th, 12th grade.
So ELA is,
So there's 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th grade share the same standards.
oh, so there's a standard for 9 and 10.
Yes.
So these students will do fantastic next year. We hope they'll continue to grow, but already they're there. They're hitting the standards, right, for 9th grade, therefore they're going to hit them for 10th grade. And then the standards, yes.
Yeah.
And then the standards shift. Okay, I didn't,
And you can see a small, like it's not as much of a gap when you look at the vertical line there, but you can see the shift still there, right? Because this was 9th grade.
okay. And I had a specific question on, okay, so that, I like how it's collectively being answered. I'm going to ask this later because I think it's, but really quick, what's the difference between proficiency and essential standards? I heard somebody here call it out, like I think it was next year we're going to focus on essential
So
standards.
speaking of academic vocabulary, right, because we've heard about that a lot, we just took everybody at Lead Forward through just a refresher on what we mean. So the state identifies priority standards that we teach, right, at every grade level and for every course. Okay, and so our curriculum already is aligned to those priority standards. Through the PLC process, part of the work that our teams do and part of, honestly, the district's responsibility is to utilize data to say, of the priority standards identified for the state, here are essentials, and we're deeming the number 10 for ELA and 10 for math, that kids have to get by grade level. They're still represented as priority standards at the state level, but we are heightening importance to what we're calling essential standards.
So it's a subset. of
But it's
proficiency.
from the priority group.
Okay.
But that gives teachers, again, even more intentionality and focus to say, if they don't get mastery of this one in 5th grade ELA, it's going to make it really, really difficult for them to master not only the essentials we've identified in 7th grade ELA, but also potentially hard to manage any of the other priority standards that DESE has outlined. So that's the difference. The essential standards are a priority standard, but the district is, and I say the district, let me clarify, because I bet someone's going to ask that in a minute. We, the district, didn't do that work, right? We have grade level and content area teacher teams that have been working on that work across the course of this year, and we'll wrap it up here very quickly by the end of June, because that is what our teachers will get at Teach Forward. They already know them as priority standards, but we're going to say, you got a whole slew of priority, and here's where we need you to keep your hedges focused. It doesn't mean they get to forget about all the other priority, but we're going to collect intentional district data on the essentials.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I remembered what I was going to ask. So there is no English 1 EOC, there's English 2. And that's taken what year? Is it at the end of, is it your sophomore year? Hence the 9th and 10th grade standards. So this cohort, which is very impressive at Parkview, will not be tested until next year. So we will not see this data for like 2 years to come back and correlate. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for our panel guests here? If none, okay, thank you again for your time.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, guys.
Further questions for Dr. Holt or Dr. Majors?
Just give me 1 minute.
She's to give me 1 minute.
I can step in. Slide number 10. How do we explain this discrepancy between rising graduation rates and falling ACT scores?
I mean, if you think I'm going to give you some silver bullet to why the data looks that way, I'm not going to. But I think what we see nationally, which is why I brought up the data, right? Because it's not just about SPS or the state of Missouri, or like ACT scores across the nation are declining year after year. What I can tell you about grad rate is we have prioritized the supports intentionally that we put in place to find out kids who are likely or probable to drop out, intervening early and supporting them along the way to get across the line to graduation. That may or may not always correlate back to a standardized ACT score, because there are a lot of other factors that we require of students in high school that enable them to graduate other than just their ACT composite score. So I guess what I would say is, I don't know that we can make the correlation that students graduating is always going to mean that composite ACT score for a district or for a state is going to be higher.
Okay. I'm not expecting a specific answer. I'm just, this has been brought to my attention before, and it just seems concerning because there's a steady incremental decline, small but steady on the ACT score, which is just hard for me to balance in my head, how you have such a leap in.
They're separate. You have to separate.
I know they're separate, but it's still ACT is still a performance measure. I mean, we know what the obvious question is here, right? I mean, how do we explain to people that we're not just passing people through?
Yeah.
You have to remember in high school, also, like you said, the concerted effort is they have multiple opportunities. So if I fail a course and I'm not on track to graduate, I can recover that course and take that course again. So that's how you explain the difference or the higher graduation rate, because we have multiple opportunities. If we think that 10, 20 years ago, sometimes that was not that opportunity when we were in high school, or you only had opportunity just to take it in summer school and that was it. We have opportunities throughout the entire school year for students to recover those courses. And then even moving into high school, a rising ninth grader can take launch courses this summer. So we have some ninth graders, I'm not sure the number, but that are taking, high school courses already. So you have to factor all of that in as it relates to our graduation rate. So students are taking those courses earlier and they have multiple opportunities if they fail.
Okay. So this is awesome. Thank you. This to me is this is
He's looking for a word, he's looking for a word.
Said something about
Instructional agility?
monitoring is.
Oh, what gets monitored gets done.
Yeah, and I think that's what we have here, and I think this is a great, seems like a great plan. Thank you for sharing it with us as something that we are identifying needs and monitoring them.
Our academics and learning support team, I mean, it's truly one vision, one team, and they truly have modeled that. I know some of the team members are also out in the audience as well, but they've modeled that this year as we get prepared for next school year. And so people are truly rallying around the vision of we need to improve the outcomes for every child that we're responsible for in our district.
So this is quite a bit newer than what we've done in prior years.
Brand new. Brand new.
As is the format of the BSIP, which is the plan for everything.
Things are changing. We're responding to the data and the needs, but we also need to be able to see it visually as it relates to those budget requests that we put in front of you and say, we need these things. And so now we're laying it out because we want also principals and teachers and parents and community members to see, here's how this particular school is performing, and this is why this particular school has this particular position. This is why this school has this another type of position. So we're trying to lay that out so that we can truly address those academic deficits that individual students have, but also an entire campus.
So as at the administrative level, we are looking at the data with individual schools, or at the building level, the leaders also looking at the data with individual teachers from their classrooms. And what does that look like? I mean,
Did you bring, they don't have a copy of the BSIP, do they?
No, we just had that one. We'll have
So,
a copy of it.
perfect segue would be that when we say that we more consistently developed metrics and action steps that will drive those building level plans, we specifically wrote into that the times and opportunities that leaders would be supporting PLTs with looking at data, changing course, setting a different goal, and then monitoring it.
so it would be the expectation that the building leader would be reviewing with each teacher their data.
We're also collecting, which is new, you just heard us talk about essential standards. We are collecting that data as well as teachers complete units where those essential standards were taught, and we're looking at that by quarter across the district so that we can start to see if first grade is doing really well with mastery of their essential standards except for one, then it gives us insight to know, is it multiple schools that are struggling? Is it all schools? And then we ask ourselves questions like, okay, if majority of our elementary campuses are struggling with mastery of this essential standard in first grade, we have to step back and say, is that pedagogy now? Is it curricular? What might be the reason why our students aren't developing mastery? But we've never had a metric that we could roll up in a way where we could see that level of specificity around data. So we built some of those into the building level BSIPs, and then that cascades into the work that our executive leaders do in their weekly PLC learnings, right? So we're on a cycle of looking at data that our executive directors bring to our PLC to say, okay, high school's really struggling with this. How does the brain trust of all these people support now what the data is showing us? So just like teachers look at their classroom level data, principals look at grade level data, EDs look at division level data, we look at district level data. So we've built in those processes to where we can start to see whether the changes need to be departmental or site specific.
The one thing you specifically asked was about what they're doing at the building level. So you keep hearing the term PLC, PLT. So the professional learning teams walk through the 4 guiding questions. And the first question is, what do students need to know, which is those essential standards, and making sure we understand, as far as the state's concerned, what does proficiency look like? The second question is, what do we do, or did they learn it? So every single week, grade level team, so if you and I both taught kindergarten, we would sit around the table and look at our formative data, and for one specific lesson, it could be a cool down assessment on a day of just one day of instruction or a unit, and we're looking at, did the students learn it, and then we're pulling in student work, and if they didn't, why didn't they, and how can we shift instruction? So when we say we're prioritizing PLC and PLT, that's happening weekly. Weekly teachers are being asked to meet within their PLT, analyze data that's in time, and then plan instruction around that data.
So can we, going back to what your other question is, when you talk about, and then I know, because I'm stealing, you're gonna get a nice little notebook in August. I might share mine tonight, but talk about the turnaround meetings when we went out to the campuses, because he asked about that, what that looks like, far as the presentation and the information that was shared at the campus level.
So when we received the data from DESE, both about comprehensive campuses as well as campuses identified in the bottom 5%, our academic teams got together and looked over that data and said, what are the supports and the things that we're going to offer, right? So we did some initial planning and thinking just as the academic team, and then we went to campuses with the plan that you see in front of you. Some parts already filled in because we knew some non-negotiables that they were going to have to commit to because of where that campus found themselves, the situation that was occurring on that campus. But then we asked a lot of questions of the leaders that applies to. What do you already have going on? We used data that we already had and said, this is what we see, what are you seeing, and how does this play out? And we formulated those plans collaboratively with them, which sometimes included additional supports at the district level. Sometimes they were getting additional cadence of coaching in a different way, but it allowed us to see, here's what we provide universally, but these are the things we're going to put into place to specifically help Holland. So those in attendance specifically at those meetings were Dr. Majors, myself, the executive director that supports that campus. If it was a title campus, which they all were, the director of federal programs was in attendance, as well as our coordinator of assessment, Matt Roseborough, who's here. Who am I forgetting? The principal, their coach, district assigned coach. Sometimes we utilized special education if we saw a great discrepancy there, or EL if we saw a discrepancy there that needed to be noted in the data. So this was really our way to not walk in and say, you're in jeopardy of failing, or you've already been identified in that way, and what are you going to do about it, leader? Because that creates some level of paralysis. But instead we said, we've been doing some thinking, and here are some ideas we have to put on the table that will support you. You tell us how else we can be a support. Because it does feel very defeating as a principal to get that phone call or to have that information given to you when you believe you are working the absolute hardest that you can. And so our goal is really in that support, but support that gets monitored, right? So it's one thing, to your point, to develop these beautiful support plans, but it's quite another to walk them through the school year and make sure that things are getting done in a way that supports better outcomes for kids.
So you recall last February 22, when we restructured and announced our restructuring for July 1, we realigned those teams to fall under curriculum. So you heard them mention all of those staff members from central office that went out to that campus, because it's about the team and those different departments providing the support to that campus. So you heard the Title I person, you heard special ed. So all of us, part of our responsibilities is to form that team and, like she said, to go out to the campus and say, here's how we're going to help you. You've tried some of these things, here's some things we want you to try, and partner together. And so that's that ongoing work when we continue to sometimes restructure, shift people around or shift departments around to make sure we are situating ourselves to be able to support our campuses.
Organizational efficiency goal too.
Yeah, you'll
Right.
notice in the first page, the support plan, that will happen. I think in the support plan it says quarterly, but it will likely be more often than that. Curriculum coordinators will be going out and we'll be analyzing data, district level, site level coaches and leaders, and looking at the data to see what supports do we need in place, what professional learning can we provide. And then a part of those meetings was also allowing the principal to tell their story, because we know that data is one version of the story, but the principal had a lot of insight. And part of those meetings was getting really real with the data and transparent, and it got a little bit awkward. And it was tough because some of the data is not good. But we came around the data and we talked about, it's not about the data, it's about what's next. So what do we do to improve the data?
Thank you. One last question. So, I think Mary, you touched on this a little bit, but so how does this kind of fit in with MAP test? So it looks like when you look at MAP test from generally speaking across a lot of categories from 2019 to 2021, there was a significant drop, and that can be explained. I mean, obviously with what happened in 2020. And then in some cases, we start to see a little bit of an uptick from 2021 to 2022. In some cases, it's gone down, just kind of variant, which makes me wonder like I'd like to obviously start to see all of those start to tick back up to 2019 levels, and so that we can get beyond that. So does Galileo help us wrap our heads around setting expectations for what 2023 math tests will look like?
So we're currently meeting with Galileo. We met with them several times, and we shared some things we were happy about with the platform, and then some things that we wanted to shift. And so, I mean, we just met with them. We have another meeting with them, but we checked. So my curriculum team, if you're here, wave. They're phenomenal. But one thing that they did is they went through every single question on that Galileo assessment, and they compared it to the rigor and the item specs of the MAP assessment to make sure that they were aligned. And we found that in a couple of grade levels, some of the questions weren't specific to the priority standards. And so what we asked them to do is fix that for next year. I mean, we dig deep into the granular data so that that is aligned, so that it will be a predictor of MAP assessment, and it will prepare kids for, we don't teach to the test, we teach the standards. But they do have to know how DESE, what they expect the students to master, or how they expect the students to demonstrate mastery of the standard, which helps with that. But, I mean, we meet with Galileo regularly.
So at a district-wide level with the data we have in from Galileo, does that give you any feeling or indication of
That it will look similar to what we see
how we've done in 2023 compared to 2022?
We're hoping it's better than the Galileo data. To be honest, we're hoping that it's better. But what we know is, so this year, when they did the initial IRT analysis, they took our last year MAP data, and we didn't have last year Galileo data because it was the first year. But going into next year, we'll have this year's Galileo data, so we'll get a lot closer to the mark.
So it'd be hard to know now, it's something to watch for, but maybe by next year, or at least the following year, we should have a pretty good idea of how closely Galileo is going to be a predictor of the MAP test.
And you heard schools talk about, so this begs the question around when we assess, right? Like we have an assessment calendar that says, which you saw on that slide with the check boxes. You heard them talk about giving the interim assessment. Because in some places, DESE says you must give our end of year assessment within the last 30 days of the school year. So we're a little bit more constrained with when we can offer the MAP assessment specifically. And so adjusting how we want to use Galileo will be something that we have to really work on moving forward, because what we want is to be able to really get that like end of third quarter post or pre-spring break interim assessment to say, if they were to take this assessment, the MAP assessment today, here is about where they would perform, to give teachers that indicator of, okay, you're doing really good on mastery in these areas, but you better start to spiral back to X, Y, and Z, because you know that's going to be a heavy hitter on the MAP test. So that those that gave the interim assessment feel confident that while their Galileo score may not have looked as good, they are feeling more confident about what MAP might look like because they had that interim to do some reteach, support, and spiral back to. So we are hopeful, Crystal's word a minute ago, that we will have a better gauge. That's the goal, right? That when we give that interim or that end of year Galileo, it is predictive for us. So we walk out going, okay, we think this grade level is going to blow it out of the water on MAP, but we're really worried about this EOC, and what are we going to do curricular-wise to fix that for the future years? That's always the goal of the local assessment.
Thank you.
Okay, so I understand that Galileo didn't have that information, but, they sold it to us as, hey, we are pretty, we do a good job at predicting. So when you're meeting with them and you're doing this consultation work for them, essentially you're helping them. We're not paying for this, right?
No.
If anything,
remember, you have to have multiple years of data for the prediction piece. So,
but I mean, are we charging them for the work that we're doing for them?
No, but that's just part of the feedback process.
I don't think you got what I said.
Okay.
No, you
No, we're not charging them.
Well, what you're doing is you're going back and saying, that these questions aren't really aligning with Missouri map testing, right? Our assessment testing, and this is how you can make it better, but that's their job. Anyway, so, very specific questions, coming back to ACT, which is why I wanted to ask you. So currently, I know there's kids that take the ACT 2, 3, even more times. The numbers that we report, is this like the seniors, the juniors, however many they take, like what number are we tracking? Does every student still take it once at least, because I know we pay for it, or the state used to, and then they stopped, and then now we do?
Yeah, so all juniors take the ACT.
So all juniors are required.
Yes, well, they offer it junior year. I'm speaking as a parent because my daughter just took it.
Well,
I can't talk about her school.
Well, I know they offer it, but I'm talking about this number. What is this number? Is it the students last? Do you wait until they're all seniors, and what does it reflect? So when somebody says the 2022 ACT, what is that?
I'm pretty sure I'm going to defer. I think it's the senior score.
Seniors.
Is it only the seniors?
The highest score.
The highest senior.
The highest score. Okay, so it's not taking. Now, if a junior chooses to never take the ACT
Yeah,
again,
if they only
they're
took it
required.
then.
They took it only then it counts, but it keeps a track of as they improve. Okay, so that's one question I had.
Like at Springfield, is option to continue to offer to pay
Yes.
for all juniors to take the ACT. Most districts in Missouri have done away with that.
I knew that.
We test a higher percentage, which obviously brings our average score down.
Yes.
So you got to keep that in mind.
It brings our average score down, and for the juniors who don't take it their senior year, they don't make those improvements, so we don't see those higher scores also.
That's right.
At one time.
Yes, I knew
Because
that.
for some of them, it
for
wouldn't
about
matter,
5,
right?
6
Because if they're not going to go to
longer now.
doing a trade or something.
Where everybody took it, was it 5 years ago where everybody took a nosedive? Okay, so I had that specific question about ACT. And then, so comprehensive schools, bottom 5%, what are the two names again?
So the state identifies the bottom 5%, and we are required to communicate to our system those. But the state also identifies comprehensive schools. So it's two different buckets, right?
So comprehensive schools will also have
Plans.
a turnaround plan as well.
Yes.
So we just,
So we're only going to have this for the comprehensive schools or for all our?
No. Those identified in the bottom 5% may not also be identified as comprehensive. So that's important to note. And the key difference between bottom 5 and comprehensive is that comprehensive schools get state funding.
Yes.
Bottom 5% schools may not, unless they've also been labeled comprehensive.
So
it's a very
how many
unique.
schools do we have right now? Because Holland, it says it's 40% for elementary, total. So I was surprised to see it as comprehensive, like in this breakdown, So how many comprehensive schools do we have and how many bottom 5?
I'm not going to name them right now, but.
Oh, don't name them, just give me the name.
We have 3 bottom 5%.
Elementary or high?
Yes. Mhm. And then we have 3 comprehensive schools. So if you'll recall, pre-COVID, they said some of that data doesn't count. You can't go in or out of comprehensive status until this year. So we just got an updated list saying these are now your newly identified comprehensive schools.
3,
Uh-huh.
5% and 3 comprehensive?
And we had 5 comprehensive before, so that tells you that 2 of them came out of comprehensive status.
So we have 3 with extra state funding.
Correct.
Of which Holland is one, because that's what you said.
Holland is
I was
a
the
bottom 5%.
5%,
So
sorry.
no, it makes no sense. The state's gonna give you funding for comprehensive, but not the bottom percent.
Yeah, because, okay.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
So we have, so
I
we're
let
going
you
to
say
have,
that, not me.
I will.
the bottom 5% is going to have a
Bottom
specific
5%, we've
plan.
already met with all of them, and they have their plans comprehensive because we just received the list. They're the
They're
next.
going to have
meetings we
something
will have.
similar,
Yes.
which is
Almost
on top of
identical.
their
ESIP.
ESIP. Okay, so we have a total of 6 schools on our radar.
We actually have 52 schools on our radar,
No,
but
no,
six that are in intensive care.
That's right, they're in the ICU.
Right. Okay. That's what I meant.
That's right, good way to put it.
And I will, I'll be making an appointment to come talk to you about the whole geometry thing, because I'm still confused and I don't want to take
We're
any
gonna
time.
send you a little recap in the board
No,
weekly
just
update.
send me that, yep.
She's still coming, she's still coming.
She's still at the top.
I don't want to take anybody's time.
That's okay.
This is good, this is very good.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
I think I go, is this right, Tammy? This one, this one, or the tree?
John and Carol's presentation, because we have another
If
presentation.
it's all right with board members, we'll take a quick 5-minute break.
Please, thank you.
8:05.
It does that.
Start it again. Moving on to item 7.01 under new business. We've got Dr. Shaw joining us at the
Can y'all
podium.
pass some of that candy around this? Oh,
That's all. That's it.
Sorry, go ahead.
just a sucker. I need something.
Good evening. As a condition for districts to receive reimbursement for transportation, routes must be included on the route approval listing and approved by local boards of education prior to June 30th. Regular year routes must also have initial approval no later than the end of October, which you all did, and then final approval by June. Special education extended school year routes must also be on this list for approval. So what you'll see in board docs are routes for July of 2022 for Explorer, June of 2023 for Explorer. These are the extended school year routes, and then you will see all of the final 2022-23 regular school year routes for buses. So you've got approximately 26 pages of the regular school year route for you to review, and then you have a separate document specific to the extended school year that has roughly 144 different individual routes. So again, this is all due to receiving reimbursement for our transportation costs from DESE. This is information this evening that you will vote on at the next meeting.
All right, so yes, we'll take a vote on June 27th with regard to these transportation routes, but are there any questions for Dr. Shaw at this time? And we'll have more weeks to review. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 7.02, we've got collective bargaining agreements, and Dr. Mulford's here to join us.
All right, board, in your board packet, under executive content is the preliminary collective bargaining agreements that we're going to ask you to vote on the 27th, and also the accompanying salary schedules. And we're also bargaining, and the reason I say it's preliminary is we're still making sure everything is, all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, and also they have to be ratified by the bargaining groups. And so that'll all be done between now and the 27th, and then on the 27th, we will ask you to vote to approve those things. You'll notice on the salary, proposed salary schedules that all employees got a minimum of a 3% COLA, but most of our employees that range from a 3 to 4% with a few unique focus areas in there of groups that we need to get wages up, and we'll cover more on that on the 27th when we present the salary schedule to you.
Any questions for Dr. Mulford at this time? All right, we'll move on to item 7.03, and you will remain with us on this item.
Okay, every year we approve miscellaneous rates and fees for the district. And so in your board packet is the proposal for next fiscal year. There are very few changes in there, but those changes are highlighted or marked in red. And so if you have questions around those, we'll do our best to get those answered.
Okay, any questions? Okay, moving on to item 7.04. I believe is Mr. Douglas joining us?
Good evening. Before you is a purchase for 255 interactive flat panels. This is part of our ongoing refresh cycle of AV equipment at 10 of our early childhood and elementary centers. This purchase is just for the interactive flat panels. We have companies that come in, set them up, install them, and then remove the old equipment separately. So this is going to bring in the equipment so that we can get this ready for the start of the school year. So happy to answer any questions you have about this purchase.
Any questions for Mr. Douglas?
Where is this funding? Is this capital?
Yes, this is a capital project for the 21st school year.
So this is part of the new budget?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 8.01 under unfinished business, collective bargaining side letter agreement. Welcome back.
Yes, thank you. Hey, last board meeting, we brought to you side letters for approval. Following that approval, we realized, actually, Ms. Mullins called me and said, hey, this was this error. So we're bringing this error to you to be fixed. But in the side letter for nutrition services, we accidentally left out a clause around preferred placement that was in the other side letters. So this is just correcting that. We're asking you for reapproval of this side letter.
Thank you. At this time, I'll entertain a motion that the board approve the side letter agreement as presented.
So moved.
Okay, motion from Dr. Thomas Tate. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Board Member McCoskey. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, we'll vote.
And for clarity, it was not Ms. Mullins' fault I was left out, it was my fault. So when I said she called me, I wasn't blaming her. I just want to make sure.
She just brought it to your attention.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay, motion carries. Moving on to item 8.02, budget recommendation information item, and we'll be voting on the budget on June 27th.
Correct. So the last few months, we've taken you through the various components of the budget. We've given you a lot of this information already. So tonight, we do have the final proposed budget is in the board packet. And this presentation that Kara's going to run through is just highlights of what is in the budget document. So we are going to move through it relatively quickly. And then at the end, if you have questions, just let us know. So here we go.
All right. So first, we'll just review the presentation objectives for tonight. So we'll just do a quick review of the process and timeline. We'll review the FY24 operating revenue and primary changes, the FY24 operating expenditure priorities and primary changes, and then we'll go through debt, service, bond, capital, HBT, and GO-CAPS at the end. All right, so we've come a long way since January, all kind of leading into this process, and that vote will take place on June 27th. As a reminder, the board does have to adopt a new budget for the upcoming fiscal year by June 30th. So this slide just provides that timeline again of the work that begins in January and kind of all ends in June. We start with a variety of budget meetings, budget requests. We have the budget updates to the board throughout kind of March, recommendation in June, and then the vote again at the end of June. And then all throughout the year, we have those monthly treasurer's reports that come to you with budget realignments as we have better information or the information changes so that we keep the board and the public apprised of changes to revenue, changes to expenditures, and changes to the fund balance. All right, information contained in the budget recommendation follows the requirements of the board policy DB, which is the annual budget. And as kind of mentioned in the budget, this budgeting process is continual, it's ongoing. So this is the best information that we have at the time. We use historical data and different types of calculations to make the projections for next year. All right, in December of 2022, the Board of Education did adopt a new 5-year strategic plan, and as leaders engaged in identifying budget requests, alignment with the strategic plan was a primary requirement. So this slide provides a review of the funds and the expenditures supported in those funds. Again, as we go through this presentation, we will review the 2023-2024 proposed revenue and expenditure budget for each fund. Next is a snapshot that is also included in the budget document. That is the general budget summary. At the bottom of the document, we have the projected ending fund balance for FY23 and the projected revenues and expenditures by fund. And then at the top, we have the proposed budget for FY24 with that ending fund balance at 23.28%. And then the revenue and expenditures by fund. So diving into operating revenue, the estimated increase in local tax for next year is $6.2 million. Final assessed valuation data is received from Greene County in August, and the tax rate levy will be set at that time. And a budget amendment is likely as we get better information from the county to really set that revenue budget.
Just real quick, if you're a property owner, you've probably gotten your reassessment notice, and we're hearing it's pretty significant in some parts of town. Okay, so to be expected, completely unrelated to the bond issue, right? Our tax levy did not change, but assessment of property has gone up, which we all expected to occur. What will likely happen in August when we go to set the tax levy, because assessment is higher than the Hancock limit of 5%, is we'll have to roll back our operating levy some. So we are anticipating that come August.
All right, moving on to state revenue, basic formula and classroom trust. We are estimating a slight decrease in FY24. And so as a reminder, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education did apply that pandemic provision to the calculation of FY24 state aid. And so we're able to use the higher of FY20, 21, 22, 23, or an estimate of FY24 average daily attendance. So for this projection of revenue, we've assumed that we're still going to use FY20 ADA. Absent this provision, the revenue decrease is about $14 million.
That's a combination of enrollment and attendance, with attendance being the biggest factor, and that's going to be a big focus next year for us.
So Proposition C, as a reminder, that is that 1 cent sales tax that is collected locally and then sent to the state and then distributed back out to the districts based on weighted average daily attendance. So we're projecting a decrease of $1.5 million in Prop C due to the pandemic provision no longer being applied to Prop C. So we will revert back to using the prior year's average daily attendance for current year calculation. So in FY24, we will have to use FY23 with weighted average daily attendance. Moving on to expenditures, this slide provides a listing of the new positions for FY24 that will support governing Priority 1 success-ready students. These positions will provide a variety of direct classroom instruction and classroom support. Additional budget requests for Priority 1 include a variety of purchase service and supplies to support choice programs, student activities, and career technical education. These positions are going to be used to support Governing Priority 2, organizational efficiency and excellence, and they support a variety of activities from training and oversight, data compliance, and just accountability around the data. Also within priority number 2, a budget recommendation of $12.1 million is included for increases to salary and benefits. So that district required retirement match, Social Security, and Medicare. Also within governing priority 2 is an increase to employer medical premium. So right now we're anticipating a 5% increase in that premium, and so a budget increase recommendation of $1 million is included in the budget. Staffing increases to support governing priority 4 quality learning environments include grounds crew and additional school police dispatchers. And then operational requests to support priority 4 include an increase totaling $2.1 million due to the rising cost of a variety of purchase services and supplies, including fuel and utilities, insurance. Also included in the operating fund is the Launch Virtual Learning Program. At this time, we anticipate a decrease in revenue due to due to a grant received in FY23, and that grant amount will slightly decrease in FY24. This slide shows the launch financials and projections. So we keep this up all year long, and this is used to project the next year's budget for launch. So this slide just has a summary of the primary revenue changes for next year, and then the primary expenditure changes for next year. Moving on to ESSER 3 funds, that American Rescue Plan Act provided an allocation for the district totaling over $61 million. Half of this amount was allocated in FY23, and the other half will be allocated in FY24. The categories have really remained unchanged from 23 to 24, And just as a reminder, FY24 is the last year that we will have the ESSER 3 funds to support the expenditures. So this is a listing of those expenditures by category and just a small description of what those expenditures support. Wrapping up the operating fund portion of the presentation, this slide represents a 5-year financial long-range projection. So as we've discussed numerous times, we are anticipating a return to a more normal operating fund balance of like 16 to 17% in the coming years as ESSER funds are spent down and as the district continues to recover from low student attendance relative to pre-pandemic levels. This projection will continue to be updated throughout the year as we have better information to inform us on the assumptions that help drive the projection. This chart provides the historical and projected fund balance. So you can see, back to 2015 where our fund balance was consistently in that 16 to 17 range. We were intentional about building that fund balance. So then once the ESSER funds went away, for us it was more of a steady decline back to normal instead of that steep drop off.
I want to kind of camp there just a second. I think it's really easy to look at projected revenues and expenses and you're really worried. But I just want to remind the board that this is something we planned for. The reason we built the fund balance up like we have was so that as the ESSER funds went away, we could do a soft landing back to normal because we spend a lot of our money on additional supports, right? And so instead of just cutting all that off at once, we want to gradually kind of do that over a few years. Also focusing on those positions that are really making a difference. And doing what we can to keep those supports in place. So that said, again, that 5-year projection, really at the end of those 5 years, we're getting back to normal, although it would be really easy to look at that and see it as just a big cliff. It's really not. As long as we take steps over the next few years to make those reductions in our budget that we need to make to get back to that normal. That makes sense?
So that wraps up the operating fund. So we'll start hopping into the other funds now. So the debt service fund has a proposed revenue of $36 million and proposed expenditures of $34 million. The 2023 bond is now included in the debt schedules, and that 73-cent tax levy will be used to support paying off those bonds. Capital project budget recommendation includes $15.6 million in revenue and $33 million in expenditures. So due to those ESSER 3 funds, we've talked about this a little bit, we are driving a few other projects home due to the use of ESSER 3 funds, and we do expect to return to a more normal capital budget in the coming years. All right, with the completion of the 2019 bond projects, there is no budget allocation for the 2019 bond fund. So the fund will be closed at the completion of the 2022-2023 audit. And during the fiscal year, during the current fiscal year, a portion of the $10 million in the capital project investment fund was used to support the remaining 2019 bond projects. And with the completion again of the 2019 bond, there's no budget allocation for this fund in FY24. So the balance in this fund will be used to support future capital expenditures. All right, so the 2023 bond fund. So, of course, in April 2023, the voters approved this no tax rate increase bond issue, providing $220 million. So on June 6th, we issued $190 million of that, and so the funds have been received, and the proposed revenue for next year based on interest earnings is $2 million, and then the proposed expenditures based on the drawdown schedule is $65 million. For Health Benefit Trust Fund, we have a revenue budget of $33 million and a proposed expenditure budget of $32.6. That is a decrease over the current year because the dental benefits are no longer self-funded, so they're not included in this fund. They're over in operating now, so you'll see that decrease. And the GoCaps Fund. So for the 23-24 school year, the GoCaps program will shift to be a district choice program within the district, and will no longer be a separate entity. So at the end of this year, once all of the revenues have been received and the expenditures have been paid, any remaining fund balance left in the GO-CAPS fund will be redistributed back out to former and current participating districts, and the fund will be closed at the completion of the audit. And that's it. That was my time.
Did well. One thing I would like to mention, and just to get it on your mind, is 2 years ago with the Franklin County decision around the way tax rates are calculated, SPS was one of about 140 districts in the state that were required to roll back their levy, the operating levy. We had to roll it back about 17 cents, which equates to about $7.5 million of local revenue that was lost due to that court decision. So depending on how things go over the next couple of years with attendance improvement, enrollment, the board just needs to keep that on your mind, and it may be something that the board needs to talk about, at least going back to the voters and asking to recoup that 17 cents that was part of our tax levy. Not something we need to do now, but it's something that needs to be on our mind that may be an action we need to take. So. And you'll be happy to note, Kelly, on the bond payment schedules, we do have what am I trying to say? The principal reduction column added. So.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? I know that we've had plenty of opportunity.
I have a couple
January to sit down with you in our small meetings and then also ask questions via email. So we appreciate your time. But
This didn't come up, so. Tell me about the dental plan again, because I must have missed that. So we cover the dental for the employee, right? The dental benefits.
Not 100% of it. The district pays a portion and then the employee pays a portion.
So we only pay the medical.
We only cover 100% of the employee medical on certain plans, and then there's a buy-up plan that's an option as well.
So how is dental different this year?
Instead of being self-insured, it's fully insured through MetLife. So instead of the expenditures and the claims running through HBT, they just run through operating in MetLife, what you would call them, just a fully insured plan. So we're not.
So prior to this current year, dental was part of our self-insured plan. So we just paid a claims manager.
That's why it was in the health benefits.
That's right.
Yeah.
But when we made the switch to MetLife, we switched to fully insured with the dental.
Oh, so now it's an operation, so we've hired somebody to do it for us.
That's right.
Okay, so that's why it's moved out of this
So it's
pocket.
out of HBT and back over into operating.
So even with the anticipated 5% increase, we're still gonna, the dental piece was,
5% increases to the health insurance.
right,
plans
even,
only.
right, but then it's offset by the dental.
Right.
That's why this is less by 400,000.
So the medical's anticipating to go up by $1 million. Part of that is the 5% increase that we did this year.
Right.
Part of that will be the 5% that we're projecting for next
For
year.
next year, because it cuts off in
And
January.
Almost like a $2 million drop in not having dental over there. So between those, you net that.
Have a wash, okay. Even though we're paying for the dental just somewhere else.
Correct.
A different fund, okay. My second question was on GO-CAPS. So we were the fiscal agent for other students from other districts.
We were the fiscal agent for the program for even ourselves, right? So
Even
we were
ourselves
just-
and other students. So now it's a district choice program, so we're only gonna, it's only gonna be for our students, and we pay the fee or,
We'll still have participating districts that can participate in the GO-CAPS program and pay tuition like they did when it was a separate fund. But instead of it being a separate fund with guidance from the chamber and that kind of stuff, that board has dissolved, and so now it's going to shift to just be a district program.
oh, so other students can still participate, kind of like they participate in
Really no
the IB
change other
program.
than it just not being in this.
It's just the fund is no longer going to exist. It's now just going to be part of our operational expense.
So it's no longer fiduciary.
Right, one less budget
That's what-
presentation
okay.
that you'll see next.
Well done.
We still have this.
Well done.
I had the same question.
But nothing is changing about GO-CAPS.
No.
Okay.
Basically, we've lost interest from other member districts, so we're just taking it over And if
Interest
there's other-
in sending
less
students?
participation.
Oh.
And then paying into it.
Because of COVID, I know it just kind of, and then it's never really recovered.
Yeah, and Ben can probably speak to that better than any of us.
One of the big factors that districts pay for seats up front based on enrollment, and they didn't always fill them. So the way we've shifted now, you can purchase seats à la carte. So districts in
From
the
us.
region can still purchase seats, they don't have to pre-purchase and chance losing.
And that's why it's not fiduciary anymore. We're not.
Not hold their money.
Thank you.
I have are you done?
Yes, yes.
I have a question, but I'm not sure it's for you all, except it's related to what you've been saying. It's maybe more directed to you and for a discussion at a later time. But as we talk about monitoring and assessing this school year, what programs are really most beneficial, and have we developed a process for that? Is that something we're doing internally? Is that something that we've hired someone to take a look at? How are we really realistically going to assess what to keep and what to
So we have developed
reduce?
a process internally, based on something that I used previously in another district, but of course, these great minds here, they took it and they've taken it to the next level. And so they have been working on that between Ms. Stasel, Mr. Douglas, Dr. Hope, Dr. Shaw. And so we have a rubric in place, and then the academics piece, Dr. Majors will be adding that. So we do have a process that we'll be rolling out. To our principals, we shared that information with them in May. And then in Learn, Lead, Succeed, July 26th, they'll see the next part, and then throughout the school year up until October, because that is the drop dead date of finalizing everything. And so yes, we have already started that process. We started that back in March. Yeah.
So principals are aware?
Oh,
of
very
things.
well. They
Okay.
are very well aware. Very well aware.
Have they shared that with employees, or is that more of an administrative?
They have not shared that with employees. What we are planning to, like I said, we have a rollout, and so it's better that if we roll it out to principals, then we will share what that communication message needs to be. One of the concerns that our schools encountered and faced was as it relates to staffing, because people were kind of freaking out that it was an ESSER position wanting to leave. We were like, you know what, we need you just to focus on the upcoming school year, and then allow us to go work through the process to make the decision. And if you recall from your small budget meetings, that 5-year projection, we've shown you how we are going to kind of, like John says, kind of step out of it so that it's not a big drop that very first year of 24, 25, but to look at that. So we have a process, we've thought about it, we've thought about our rollout and how we want to communicate that message moving forward, and we'll be bringing that, updating that information also to the board.
I think it's important to note publicly that we have no intention of cutting positions, okay? We have enough positions that come open every year that if a specific ESSER-funded position is deemed to go away, then we will offer that person a job for something else they're qualified for within the district. We have plenty of opportunity in the district. We don't anticipate cutting anybody.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? All right, and then before our vote on June 27th, of course, we'll have more weeks to ask questions. Thank you. Item 9.01, there are no bond project updates or actions, surprisingly. Okay. We'll move on to item 10.01, superintendent's update.
Yes, just congratulations again to our graduates that graduated on May 20th. We had over 1,800 graduates, $21.6 million in scholarships for the graduating class. I want to take the time to thank all of our union representatives and our bargaining groups over the past several months. They spent a lot of time. We had things that we wanted. They had ideas and things that they wanted, and we were able to, everyone to get everything they requested at the table, but we were able to reach a resolution. And I want to thank also the union. You made some adjustments based on salary time, schedules of staff employees, and I know there were some late nights, and we had to change some members of our bargaining team due to medical issues. So thank you all for being cooperative and working with us. I also want to thank the board for tonight. Hopefully people were able to see, board members have spent a lot of time over the past several weeks and months around the budget. but also getting their questions answered as it related to the proposed agenda. So thank you, board members, for coming in and sending those questions. If you have additional questions around the proposed budget, we would love to schedule some time if you need it between now and June 27th for you to come in. Just a reminder, our Back to School Bash is steadily approaching. It will be on Saturday, July 29th at the Expo Center, so I want to remind you of that. And I just want to say happiness is when you walk out of your garage and there's a grandma that meets you. She's doing her morning walk, making me look bad, that says, thank you for the backpack of books that you sent home that my child brought to my house. I have something to do with them during the summer. So that is happiness to hear. And so, of course, Dr. Majors, I have a great idea for next summer how we can get more grandparents involved, and we'll talk about that later. But just that is just such happiness to me that everyone is reading this summer. So that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lathan. Moving on to item 11, board comments. Any board comments from board members this evening? Okay. Seeing none, I'll move on to upcoming meetings. Of course, our next meeting is June 27th. It'll be our last meeting for the fiscal year at least, and we'll go over the budget. And then there will be no board meeting in July. We'll reconvene in August. This time, I will move on to item 12.01 and entertain a motion that the board meeting adjourn for the evening.
So moved.
Motion from Dr. Thomas Tate. Do I have a second?
A second.
Second from Ms. Bruner. This time, we'll vote. Motion